Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's now 4 p.m. and welcome to the April meeting in the Hamilton Police Services Board. And I'll officially call this meeting to order. And at this time, I'd like to call on Staff Sergeant Maggie Schoen to come forward for the Members of the Month and for the Pride Awards. Maggie, the podium's yours.
Good afternoon, Police Service Board Chair, Police Service Board members, Chief De Caire, Deputy Chief Gert, Deputy Chief Leendertz, senior officers, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Maggie Schoen, and I am the Executive Officer to Chief De Caire. Today, I would like to present the Member of the Month Award. Could I please ask Acting Sergeant Michael Hall to please come to the front. On January 14th, 2014, Hamilton Police were dispatched to attend a residence on Park Street South for an unconscious male in a bathtub. Acting Sergeant Mike Hall was the first officer to arrive on scene. He found a male unconscious in the bathtub with family and neighbors present. The water had been drained from the tub, and the male was in obvious medical distress. Acting Sergeant Hall assessed the situation and realized the male was unable to be lifted from the bathtub. Without delay, Mike began CPR on the male until additional officers arrived on scene. While conducting CPR, he assumed command of the scene, giving direction to secure witnesses and clear the residence for the arrival of fire and EMS personnel. EMS eventually took over the care of the male, who suffered 2 further cardiac arrests on scene prior to being transported to hospital. The situation was deemed medical in nature and no foul play was suspected. The secured scene was then released and hospital staff was able to revive the male, and at the end of our police involvement, he was in critical but stable condition. Acting Sergeant Michael Hall is being commended for his quick and decisive actions, showing true dedication to duty and victims of circumstance. Please join me in congratulating Acting Sergeant Michael Hall as the recipient for Member of the Month. I am also honored to present the next awards. I would like to ask Peter Mercanti, JP Mercanti, Joe Mercanti from Carmen's Banquet Center to please come forward, as well as Mr. Tom Leckie from Will's Bus Lines to come forward as well. The Chief's Pride Award is given to members of the Hamilton Police Service and members of the community who go above and beyond normal expectations. These are special acts of compassion, support, and quality service that are worthy of recognition. Project Concern is the in-house charity of the Hamilton Police Service, where employees donate through payroll deduction. There are no administrative costs associated with Project Concern, and in 2013, over $35,000 was donated to local Hamilton charities. One of the highlighted annual events is It's a Kid's Christmas. For the past 20 years, Carmen's Banquet Center and Will's Bus Lines have partnered with Project Concern in coordinating It's a Kid's Christmas event. The event is the yearly Christmas party organized by the Police Service's Project Concern. The children and their families are chosen on a needs basis by area schools and community agencies. Over 300 children and their families attend each year, and the staff of Carmen's, Will's Bus Lines, and Hamilton Police all volunteer their time to make this night possible. The Mercanti family has graciously donated their hall, provided food and drinks for the event, and have spent a great deal of their own time organizing the event within their own organization. The wait staff there volunteer their own time to provide service during the party, and without this dedication and support shown by Carmen's and the Mercanti family, this event would not be possible. Will's Bus Lines has ensured that all of the children and members of their family are safely transported to and from the event in a coach bus. All of the drivers at Will's Bus Lines donate their time to make this event possible, and without their dedication and support shown by their staff, this event would not be possible. Will's Bus Lines has now become Batter Bus Service and will continue the supportive relationship with Project Concern around the It's a Kid's Christmas event. Hamilton Police are proud to partner with Carmen's Banquet Center and Will's Bus Line on this annual event and wish to recognize their dedication, support, and contributions to the Hamilton community. Without your continued partnership, this event would not be the success it is today. Please join me in congratulating the recipients of the Chief's Pride Award, Carmen's Banquet Centre and Wills Bus Lines.
Well, thanks, Maggie, and thanks again to everyone who received an award tonight. And at this time, we'll move on to item 2.3 in the agenda, which is suspension without pay. And Chief, would you like to introduce this?
Chair and members of the board, I'd like to introduce Superintendent Nancy Goods-Ritchie, who will be making a presentation. Just while the superintendent is setting up, I want to thank for her leadership and the entire team that came together to do the research in updating the OACP white paper from 2007. And we will have the presentation, and then I'll have post-presentation. Chair, I'll have a few comments to make.
Thank you. Well, welcome, Superintendent, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. I'm here to talk to you about the Ontario Police Services Act and our proposed changes to the issue of suspension without pay.
You need to get right
In a
up to the
second.
microphone and pull it down to you so we can hear you. Pull it down as far as you need to. Thank you.
Okay. The Ontario Police Services Act is the sole governing legislation as it pertains to suspension without pay for all police officers in Ontario. Section 89 of the Act states that if a police officer is convicted of offense and sentenced to a term of imprisonment, the officer may be suspended without pay even if that sentence is under appeal. This is the only time that suspension without pay is permissible under the Act. In this regard, the OACP, Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, has created 3 documents to address this issue. The resolution paper in 2007, a white paper from the Suspension Without Pay Working Group in 2010, and you'll hear me refer to this on a couple of occasions this afternoon, as well as a position paper, basically which is in support of the first 2. By way of an overview, the OACP Suspension Without Pay Working Group submitted a white paper in February 2010. The paper paid tribute to the professionally minded, community-oriented police service that we deliver. It acknowledged, however, that there are occasions and events which test the bond of trust between the community and the police. And sometimes this trust can have implications far beyond the immediate scope. The issue of police officers involved in serious criminal activity and the response of the police service to that criminality is one such issue. The paper outlined that the purpose was to bring to the attention to the Government of Ontario the strong conviction of Ontario police leaders through the OACP that the Police Services Act needs to be amended to allow for the issue of suspension without pay for police officers who commit serious offenses. This paper further outlined the significant consequences to the erosion of public trust should changes not occur. The OACP therefore called for an amendment to the PSA under the following 2 criteria. When a police officer is charged with a serious offense contrary to the Criminal Code of Canada, the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, or other federal act not related to the performance of their duty, and when a police officer is charged with an offense and held in custody or subject to a judicial interim order with conditions that prevent the officer from performing their policing duties. The purpose of our position is not to restate, but to adopt the previous recommendations, key issues, and messages from the OACP documents that I mentioned, and further state that it is additionally necessary to permit a police chief to suspend an officer without pay for serious Police Service Act misconducts. This third consideration and exceptional circumstance also represents a fundamental breach of trust, and necessarily it would only be reserved for the very serious misconducts which could result in the dismissal of the officer. In addition to the recommendations contained in the OACP white paper, it is therefore further recommended that suspension without pay should not be limited only to those charged with a criminal offense or who are in custody or on bail. Tax dollars should not be spent to pay the salaries and the benefits of police officers who have committed misconducts so egregious that it represents a fundamental breach of trust, as I mentioned, and will significantly affect their continued performance of their policing duties. In such exceptional circumstances, the Chief of Police must have the power to suspend without pay. Therefore, these circumstances should also include a third criteria, when a police officer is charged with a serious misconduct under the Police Services Act. We recognize that consideration must be given to that the police would seek dismissal of the officer and could establish that the allegations could lead to the dismissal of the officer. And when failure to suspend without pay would bring the reputation of the police service as a whole into disrepute. We also recognize that each case has to be addressed independently based on the seriousness of the allegations and the officer's individual circumstances. Suspension without pay should never be automatic. Vesting the authority to suspend without pay is quite appropriate in the hands of the Chief of Police, as the Chief is responsible for the operations of the police service, as well as the maintenance of Part 5, the discipline under the Police Services Act. In terms of process, our recommendations are as follows. In these exceptional circumstances, for instance, a serious misconduct which does not result in criminal charges, once the notice of hearing is served on a police officer in accordance with the Police Services Act, the Chief of Police should have the ability to suspend the police officer without pay. The suspension without pay would come into effect 60 days after the service of the notice of suspension and the notice of suspension without pay, which would include the reasons for the suspension without pay. The police officer would have an ability to seek a review of the decision, and we're recommending that this review be conducted by the Ontario Civilian Police Commission, OCPC. This would be done within 30 days of receiving the notice of suspension without pay. The officer would also be provided with the statement of particulars. This would be an administrative hearing and not an adjudicative process, and the officer would have the right to be heard and have the right to make submissions to the Commission. The Commission would either confirm the suspension without pay or reinstate the officer's pay during the period of suspension. This review would only address the compensation issue. Where a police officer is suspended from duty without pay and the criminal charge is not proceeded with, or the police officer is found not guilty of all offenses and any included offenses, and is found not guilty of all charges under the notice of hearing under the Police Services Act, the officer would be entitled to all of their pay, benefits, rights, and privileges to which they would have been entitled if they had not been relieved from duty. Any amendment to the Act would necessarily require the stakeholder input, in particular, the Police Association of Ontario. they would put forward a position of police officers from an association's perspective. It's not anticipated, however, that this premise would be endorsed by the PAO as was outlined previously on their website as it pertains to the white paper. The issue of suspension without pay is not a new one. There is recognized need across the country to address this issue. Several provincial legislatures have provincial-related legislation to permit the suspension of police officers without pay. And here are the 5 provinces and 1 city bylaw. In way of a case example, in October 2009, a Hamilton senior police officer was suspended with pay for numerous serious Police Act charges. After numerous delays, the senior officer tendered his notice of retirement on the first day of the hearing, 4.5 years after he was suspended. During that time he was suspended, he received approximately $550,000 in salary. None of the allegations related to his assigned duty, job description, or work performance, but all of the allegations offended his oath of office and offended the public trust. In conclusion, as stated in the OACP white paper, the fundamental trust between the police and the public is sacred. When police officers breach this trust, the community has a deservedly high expectation that the officers will be held appropriately accountable. Ontario's police chiefs are entrusted to maintain and enhance that trust with the public and have called upon the Ontario government to open the Police Services Act to permit suspension without pay. It is recommended, in addition to the previously stated two considerations put forward by the OACP, that when a police officer is charged with a very serious misconduct under the Police Services Act, the officer may be suspended without pay if it is a dismissal case. We hope that we have your support in this recommendation.
Thank you very much, Nancy. And I think Chief De Caire, you'd like to make some comments, and I'll open it up to comments and questions from the board.
Thank you very much, Chair, members of the board. The Hamilton Police Service fully supports the OACP 2007 resolution regarding a request for the authority to suspend in serious criminal offenses, drug offenses, federal offenses, and for those held in custody or judicial orders which prohibit officers from performing their duties. This work of the working group adds the request for authority to suspend in serious Police Service Act matters where the chief is seeking dismissal. And the recommendation of this working group went to the OACP Zone 4 meeting on March the 6th, 2014 for the members to vote on, and it was passed with resounding support in a recorded vote. We need to step back for a moment and remember what suspension with pay was intended for, and that was intended to protect officers in the lawful performance of their duty, to protect officers against false accusation. It was never designed to shield misconduct not related to our oath of office or our duties. On the 29th of May 2013, the OACP publication stated that there is simply no credible argument for continuing to pay officers charged with such serious criminal offenses, particularly those doing so that gravely damage the public trust. A lack of any credible argument in those circumstances equally applies to serious misconduct under the Police Services Act, hence the recommendation of our working group. The community, the chief, and let's not forget the law-abiding and officers that perform their work every day, they find the egregious misconduct reprehensible, offensive to the oath of office, not remotely related to the enforcement of law, and not remotely related to the performance of duty in good faith or any expectation of what the community expects of the police officers. In OACP correspondence of 2007, it cited that citizens should not be expected to pay the salaries and benefits of officers who cannot perform their duties due to serious criminal charges unrelated to their duties. And in building upon that, We believe that citizens equally should not be expected to pay the salaries and benefits of officers who can't perform their duties as a result of serious PSA matters. The working group reinforces our position, and we need to ask for what we need in order to maintain the public trust and confidence, and we need to ask for what we need to protect our oath of office. There is an abundance of community support for this position, and the Hamilton City Council passed a unanimous resolution to support suspension without pay for both criminal and serious PSA matters, unanimous in their vote, and the councillors that sit around this table represent 525,000 Ontarians. Subject to any questions, those are our comments.
Well, thank you very much, Chief, and Nancy, thank you. As board chair, I could tell you that we appreciate this coming forward. I think the community is outraged by the abuse of the system has taken on so far. And I'm also very comfortable with the fact that if an officer is charged and his pay is suspended, but is found to be not guilty or exonerated, that in fact all those back checks and benefits and other things he's obligated to will be returned back to him. So I think that gives us all a lot of comfort. So thank you again for your presentation today. And Councillor Whitehead, I think you have some comments or questions.
I certainly appreciate it. I wish it was, I could say it was timely. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have this in place several months or several years ago. Having said that, it's never too late. The first question I have, though, when you talk about the redress, you don't mention redress or made in full, redress in full. And what I'm referring to is there's an interest. If they're not accumulating a salary and at the end of the process they're found innocent, there would have been an interest that would have accumulated on those salaries. You don't address the interest in regards to the redress if in fact they're found innocent.
Well, sorry. I think that the premise is that principally is to make whole again. And so it'll be those kinds of details that I think would certainly need to be hammered out. But if we go on the premise of in good faith and with good spirit that we make whole again, then we do what we need to do in order to make whole again.
The other thing, and I used to represent workers and do a lot of grievances myself, vice chair of a grievance committee, the undue hardship. So one of the reasons, and I think the chief spoke to the fact that this was protect people from, allegations and so forth in fulfilling the responsibilities as a police services officer. But we're stepping outside that a bit and saying if there's PSA issues that aren't directly related to the performance of their duty, this is where there should be some discretion in exercising suspension without pay. So if that individual or officer has, or it can show undue hardship, is there a provision that we contemplate within the amendments we're looking to go forward with to respect undue hardship?
Want to take that, Chief?
Undue hardship would be a matter of perspective. So who are you referring to? Undue hardship on the taxpayer or undue hardship on the member?
At this point, I'm talking about the member.
The reason that we have designed it in this way is to allow for a review process, and that needs to be negotiated with the parties. So if anybody wanted to raise that as an issue, they would do so at that review process and make their argument for someone to adjudicate on, keeping in mind that that review process is not an appeal and it does not act as a stay of the decision while the review is taking place, and it is only centered on the issue of compensation. The Police Services Act is clear that it is the responsibility and the authority of the chief with respect to discipline. So we're not asking anybody to make those decisions. We're asking for the opportunity to build in balance and fairness for the officer and have the review.
So do we have examples in other jurisdictions? You identified 5. In this review process in regards to the compensation, do they have written right within the criteria undue hardship? How do they have that appeal process? Do they have written right into that appeal process if it could be shown that there's undue hardship to a member? If that case could be made, that would be one of the considerations for the board or whoever makes that decision.
In our research, we were only able to find where it was invoked on one occasion of those examples that I had up on the slide there. And in that occasion, there wasn't specifically a hardship issue that was addressed on the front end. So if you're asking that it would be addressed at the time, I don't know whether or not the officer brought that forward at the review stage, because it is a review stage with them as well. But it would have, when it was all said and done, that would have been to the officer to do and not to the police service. Did they do an undue hardship? I couldn't speak to that.
I appreciate that. The only reason I ask is I just want to make sure that it's wholesome and comprehensive an approach we take. At the end of the day, I think in our society, people are innocent until proven otherwise. And I understand the provision to protect the taxpayer. I'm a big supporter of it, and I started my conversation. I wish we had something like this in place years ago. Having said, I want to ensure that it's a balanced approach to ensure that we're reflecting some of those unforeseen circumstances where there can be what was referred to, and I know that certainly in my experience in labor, there's a thing called undue hardship, and those things are considered seriously. I just want to make sure that that's incorporated in some form or fashion. It's not just undue hardship to the taxpayer, as we already experienced, but there could be circumstances with a particular officer until he's actually proven guilty of something, where he has family members, whether they're in the hospital, coverage, which are significant costs, and all of a sudden now you've taken his way of supporting his family completely away from him to support those particular ongoing costs. To me, that would be undue hardship in regards to the family, especially as the sole provider. And I just want to make sure that we don't cut our nose to spite our face, and that we do provide provisions to recognize those individual. There won't be a lot, but there may be some individual circumstances. I want to make sure that we contemplate that in this process. The
Microphone, please.
The next question I have is the Winnipeg city bylaw. So when you make that presentation, it might suggest to the viewers and people in the audience that a city can just pass a bylaw and away we go. So I want to make sure we got clarity on why in Winnipeg they could do a bylaw, but in Hamilton we could not take that approach.
Right, and certainly I can't speak to how Winnipeg was able to do that, and your point's a good one, and thank you for that. So as we know with a bylaw, if our bylaw is in contravention to a provincial legislation, the provincial legislative body would actually override the bylaw. So we would automatically default to the provincial legislation. So thank you, sir.
Appreciate that. And the last piece is, so this is a lobby. Basically, where positions are being taken from the boards, the chiefs of police, and imagine OAPSB probably has taken the same position. Are we forwarding this position to AMO as well and get the endorsement of AMO?
At this point, it is not the position of the service to advance this to AMO. If council wishes to do that, I would see that as a natural tie. But it's not a tie for the police service, and it's not a tie, in my opinion, for OAPSB as well.
And I recall, Councillor, that when council unanimously supported this, Russ asked for AMO to be copied.
And I just want to ensure that when you're talking about making changes in significant legislation like the Police Services Act, Mr. Chair, that you're running on all cylinders and all the organizations have any ability to provide influence on these amendments and changes, that we are using those tools. So I certainly appreciate and really appreciate the presentation as well.
Okay, and I have no other speakers, so at this time, just to the members of the public know, the board at a previous meeting passed a unanimous resolution. It's called Appendix E in the report, the last page, that supports this. The reason we had to do it earlier is we needed to get a resolution off to the Ontario Association of Police Services Boards to meet their deadline for their annual general meeting to be held in May. And of course, I want to congratulate Nancy De Caire. She just got reelected to the board. And so Nancy, you'll be carrying this resolution forward. So all I need tonight from the board is a motion to receive it. Moved by Madam Levy, seconded by Nancy De Caire. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Thanks very much, Nancy, for that presentation. It was very thorough. We'll now move on to some annual reports. Chief, do you want to do the introduction now to item 2.4, Property and Evidence Managed Process Audit?
Thank you very much. And just as the team is coming down to make the presentation, I really want to emphasize our appreciation as a service to all the members of the team. Inspector Anderson, Acting Inspector Paul Evans, Margaret Couch, and Lynn Holt, Peter Bailey, Jan Grease, and many, many others who have contributed to this. 5 years ago, we started with a commitment to looking at the business structures, looking at our business strategy, developing our skills, and building the work systems. And this project incorporates all of those aspects. We commenced with the 2011 audit. We looked at our business process reengineering, and the team has really taken to heart the areas of looking after property, mitigating risk, looking after the impact of risk, expanding our systems use, using technology and providing training to our people. And this is a great news story for the Hamilton Police Service in how we're advancing our business. Inspector?
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Chair, members of the board, Chief De Caire, deputies, fellow officers, and ladies and gentlemen. We're here today to provide you with an update on some of the work that has taken place since an audit was completed on the property and evidence management processes at the Hamilton Police Service. As you will recall from the original report to the board, the objectives of the audit were to determine the effectiveness and efficiency of the management and operation of the property and evidence function, to evaluate compliance with rules and regulations, to determine the adequacy of safeguards against loss, fraud, and other mishandling, to determine the accuracy of records, and to assess the adequacy of our automated applications. I am able to tell you that under the direction of Deputy Chief Eric Gert, and in large part through the efforts of Acting Inspector Paul Evans, here's with me behind me today, Constable Margaret Couch, Lynn Holt of the Niche Resource Team, that the Hamilton Police Service has become national award winners for their innovative solution to some of the recommendations in the audit. The report you have received in your briefing packages outlines many of the details of this work. What we would like to provide you today is a demonstration of how we have maximized the potential of our niche RMS system using peripheral devices and business rule changes to make improvements in our property and evidence management processes. It is this work that resulted in the team being recognized by their peers from across the country and the vendor Niche Canada with a Niche Innovation Award, which they will receive at the Niche National Conference in May. Acting Inspector Evans and Constable Couch will guide you through the stages that property and exhibits follow from the time they enter into the possession of the Hamilton Police Service to the time they are either returned, auctioned, or destroyed. Together, these steps lead to a huge increase in efficiency, time savings for staff, accountability, accuracy, and a reduction in the risk to the service.
Thank you, Inspector. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to come here tonight and speak with you regarding our property module. As the inspector indicated, what we're going to do is just quickly take you through an A to Z tour of the module. It's probably about a 2-hour presentation you're going to see in about 5 minutes. But I think we can sum up how efficient it is. Since we're talking about efficiency, we're going to show you how efficient the module is. The one thing that we did indicate earlier, the chief indicated, is we wanted to look at everything. And we took on that challenge and looked at it from an entire lens of the whole service, A to Z. We didn't want to go singular approach, but we went rather a systems approach. And we looked at every unit and every department within our service. We didn't want to use it as an administrative process, but rather an operational process. So we brought them all together in a symbiotic relationship. And I think the product we came up with at the end merits the awards in which we won nationally. So to start off with, what we're going to introduce to you is the actual, we got to connect our screen here. Here it is here. apologize. We had to go live into our network back at the service to be able to demonstrate it, so we had to switch out terminals. The screen in which you see in front of you is our training database. There's nobody actually in it of anybody's notoriety, so they're all our own people and exhibits. What you're looking at here is what we call our niche screen, our niche application. It's our records management system. One of the modules in it is the property module. The property module itself houses things like a silo, like everything has individual folders placed within. We started utilizing this portion of the module back when the process started. So what you're looking at right now is an actual property tab within an occurrence. This ties directly into our occurrence. Our previous system was a standalone system that didn't tie an actual occurrence back to the property module. They were two separate beasts. So what you're looking at here is the property module. One of the unique things that we have in Hamilton is we are a data entry at source service. So that means the second that a piece of property or evidence exhibit comes into the hand of an officer, we truly are from cruiser to court continuity. No other agency is able to do that the way we've done it with our system. So what you view here is that actual property module within the actual property tab. What Margaret's going to do for you is demonstrate what an officer is expected to do, and they can do this right from their cruisers, or they can do it back in the station. So she's going to open up and she's going to show you what an involved firearm would be. We're running a gun amnesty right now, so it's very fitting that we put a firearm into this occurrence. So while she's doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what we were previously doing prior to this module being implemented. So Margaret is entering in a piece of property. What an officer would have had to have done in the field previously is they would have had to take the property and enter it into their notebook manually, and it's connected to nothing. They would have to fill out a paper property tag that's connected to nothing and send it into our property section with the exhibit. And at that point, our property branch had to enter this into another system that wasn't connected to this occurrence, so there's no continuity of evidence there. And then finally, the officer had to enter it into a logbook in the property section so that the property people could house it as a property warehouse. We were looking at, previous to this system, we were looking at the last 2 years, we went from 21,000 exhibits in our system to 28,000. So our property rooms were growing in size and we were looking for more storage space because the issue was we couldn't purge on the back side fast enough to get it out because of all the manual processes. So what Margaret's done is she's entered it in. We've linked it to the actual owner. And this step right here that she's doing the stores management tab is actually adding it to our inventory list. The way you think about the property module would be the same as any inventory list in a store from a Canadian Tire inventory control standpoint. So everything comes in, a package in, a package out. So it's 100% continuity for liability, tracking, and evidence for court. So Margaret's putting it in a location, and this is our property tag. And she's going to put it to a responsible officer. The second she does this, what's unique about our system that we were unique built in Hamilton solution was previously this would go in our system and would sit in our system for a couple of years until the property folks were able to get around to find out what was the outcome of this tag, and they would have to send it back to an officer. The officer would have to investigate their case, send it back into the property branch. The way we've built this system is now the second this enters in by that officer who submits the thing, Margaret, it's okay, it automatically starts the clock ticking, 180 days. The system is automated, and what that does is it automatically sends a task to my working task box to which my supervisors can review. This is the property bar tab that actually goes onto the property, but it's an automation of a system. So therefore, if you figure 28,000 exhibits, somebody manually has to pull each one of those, send it out to an officer and send it back. You're looking at about 10 minutes per exhibit on each end. The system automation, it goes right in and out on its own within 180 days. Okay, so that's stage one of the entry into the property. Now, since we have a firearm here, tracking for continuity of evidence with regards to court purposes, we can check anything out at any given time. So Center of Forensic Sciences, a firearm has to go off to be tested. It's as simple as the forensics or the property management folks will be able to send it out to the CFS and it's checked out. So any investigator in the service, any member of our service can open an occurrence at any time, find out where that firearm is. If the Crown calls us and says we need that firearm, it's not hours of calling, emailing back and forth to try to get the right officer. We can see that right now, at the bottom, it says checked out to the Center of Forensic Sciences, so we know the time and date of that. That has an automation built into it, so property is notified within 30 days that it has not come back yet. So checks and balances put in place on an automation side that used to be a manual process. That now gets checked back in because FedEx has brought it back to us, or Purelator has brought it back to our service. our property folks check it back in. This next stage is probably one of the most unique, and from a continuity and security standpoint of the evidence for any officer signing in and out of court, this is where a lot of our problems down the road ran into some issues with timing. So now an officer wants to attend court. Our court staff have a computer right there at their desk. Or our property staff have a computer. An officer can attend to the property window. And simple enough, the barcode that I just showed you, officers put it right in their notebooks for that occurrence. They get a court notification date. They attend property. Property staff is able to bring up that item immediately right into that one item. Previously, I'd have to provide them a number. They would have to go back in, log into a different system, figure out where it is. This way, within 1 second, if Margaret was my property clerk, at this point, she can tell me exactly what shelf it is on in the service. She can go get it, bring it back to me. From continuity of evidence for two-factor security now, we have my account linked to it. Margaret presents me with the ability to sign that property out to court. We've implemented an electronic signature pad, so now not only is it linked to my electronic account, and automatically the clock is ticking with 7 days, my account gets a notification, as well as my supervisor and the property people, saying I took something to court and it is not returned. So within 7 days, we know that it hasn't returned. Previously, that could be a long period of time by the time we manually got back around to that process. Within 7 days, if I don't return that, I get the task, property gets the task, and I'm asked to come back in and account for that property. At that point, if I do return it and I want to hand it back in, the same process would be in place. I would then sign for it to go back in. The system said I put it in, but my signature said I put it in. It is now free and clear and it's back in the system. So that is our property process. We won't, for time's sake, we won't get into a community member showing up, but anybody that has lost or stolen property that we take possession of, it's the exact same thing. A member of the community can come in. What's nice about this process, the way we built it in, if, say, you had your home broken into and we recovered 300 items from your break-in, all of these are in our system. Previously, a member of the community had to sign 300 property slips to get those items back. We do now bulk disposals. Margaret can highlight all 300 items, the same as we could with a bulk disposal for destruction. And it's one signature. The member of the community has them all back. Our entire system purges the system. And instead of photocopying and scanning a property tag back in 300 times to count for it with a signature, we are now done. So what would have been an hour, 2 hours work of scanning is now about 30 seconds on a signature pad. It's been purged from our inventory system. The final thing that I would talk about before I go from an efficiency standpoint that we're talking about that was probably one of the biggest evidentiary changes for us is from our drug exhibits. Using the module, our drug clerk used to pick up drugs on a Friday, and it would take about a week before he could process all of the exhibits to get them ready for submission to the Center of Forensic Sciences for testing and back ready for court. He is now done by the end of Monday, if not Tuesday morning. So he went from a week's work down to about a day. What that has allowed us to do is he can take work off the frontline officers with regards to splitting drugs, and he does all the work for the investigators so the investigators can go back out in the field. The final piece is a programming report that we've created. The final piece of documentation is the officers doing drug exhibits. If there was 300 drug exhibits at a house, they had to account for where they found it, who found it, where it was found, time, date, stamped, and they had to manually fill out this report. What we've created is a report within Niche. It's one click, and the report is automatically created for them within about 30 seconds, not even. And if an extra drug exhibit's been put in or taken out of the play, along with play over the next 6 months, the report's real-time up to date. This is moving towards our final stage of implementation of our service with regards to electronic disclosure of all files. So at this point, we wrap everything up into one unique inventory system that's all done through a one-time data entry, basically from a frontline officer standpoint, as opposed to multiple. The final thought, without getting into the demonstration, is if we have, say, 10,000 guns, after the end of the amnesty, if 10,000 guns came into play, we're able to sort and locate them within our service within a second, which room they've been placed into. We can highlight the entire group and sort and dispose of all 10,000. We can check them off on our barcoder, tell us what's being destroyed and be done. Those firearms would take months to be able to purge previously. So we've been able to wrap that up literally within 20 minutes on the purge end. So the automation end of it, I think A to Z, we've covered off all our units for all our exhibits, property alike. Inspector?
Thank you, Paul. And I just want to point out the dedication of Constable Couch here. She broke her shoulder this past week, and this is how dedicated she is because she wanted to be here today for you folks. So thank you, Margaret. As you can see, the Hamilton Police Service continues to find success in looking at our business processes, our systems, using technology where possible to save money, be more efficient and effective, and we continue to work in that vein. So I open up the floor to any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Inspector. Thank you, Jamie. Margaret, how do you type with one arm? I can't do that. Must be a tough... No, that's a good answer. Just one quick question, and I think Councillor Whitehead also has a question. Now, is this live? So it's being used. How long has it been live? How long?
November 2013.
Okay, so 6 months?
And the one thing I would add to that, sir, is at the time before we went live, there was a business case before us looking for an extra staff member to work in our property branch because our backlog was so incredible. We've now caught up to the backlog, and our room volume is decreasing. We now have empty shelves, and we no longer have that request for that extra body to be working in that area.
Oh, congratulations. Now, the other question is, constables who are over 40, how do you train them how to do all this stuff? Is it under 40, you know, they seem to fly on it, but over 40, I know I'd have a heck of a time figuring this out. It must take an extensive amount of training to teach officers how to do this, is it?
I'm not part of the training team. These folks do all the work, but what I can tell you, as one of those senior members, that I've been able to adapt to it myself. And it's only because of the dedication of the team and the people working at that job who anticipate the needs of the adult learner, and through all those processes are able to do it. And what's really fascinating is when niche was first introduced to our service, and it's happening up the road, and they're having a lot of difficulties introducing a new RMS system. But you folks decided a few years ago that we were going to go the niche way, which was a good decision, because now when we put in processes like this, the whole organization adapts very easily, and we can continue to grow in that vein. So it's a long-term strategy, and it's paying off.
Have you been able to quantify what the annual savings are? Not having all that staff time and paperwork to do?
It was difficult, but we did look at least 2 FTEs for staffing. The time for an officer who spends time doing the work on an administrative function isn't necessarily equated to cost, because it's really opportunity cost. What they could have been doing out in the street in terms of crime prevention and looking at their POP projects and other types of things. So for a dollars and cents thing, I could break it down with respect to paper costs and labeling costs. But more importantly is the opportunity cost, and that's what we really want to focus on.
It saves 2 FTEs across the service then?
That's right, because we were talking about at least one person in the property branch to look after the backlog, potentially in the drug office, because all the exhibits that get processed have to go to the Health and Welfare Canada to process and be brought back. And there was a backlog that had to be looked at before we could just destroy them, and we can't destroy them until we get the permission. So things were getting backed up that way, and it was causing a potential need for more space for storage. So that was becoming another issue. So all this has looked after all those problems.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and certainly shows how technology, utilize the technology can create more efficiencies within the organization, which again means opportunity for the officers to do what they're actually hired to do, not the paperwork, but be out in the street. The question I have is, this is a closed system or an open system?
Reference to what, Councillor?
Well, the software you're using for the development of the niche program, that's a closed system or an open system?
Well, it's an off-the-shelf product that's just isolated to our service in-house. We don't share with others.
So it's a closed system, it's a licensed
Yes.
system. As courts and inquiries and inquests and evidence issues change, how adaptable is this system, or would you have to buy a different software?
No, we're right on pace. Right now, we're working towards, similar to what your question is, we're working towards an e-disclosure project. That will be our next big one. Every agency, no matter what your RMS is, we meet in the middle, and we're going to overlay it with an Adobe software suite. So no matter what RMS you use, we're able to extract that data, prepare it like you've seen here, and put it into an Adobe suite, and then be able to push it out that way in a singular system, province-wide or nationwide, actually.
And in the vehicles where you have the computers, you have access to help to save you the work by inputting it. If you have an occasion, which I guess would be a rare occasion, where you have two officers in the same vehicle, they still have access to that same computer system to their personal files or personal information in regards to those inputs?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I see no other questions, so I need a motion to receive. Moved by Madeline, seconded by Chad. All in favor? Thanks very much. Very, very informative presentation. Chief, do you want to introduce now the year-end use of force report?
Thank you very much. Building on that excellent work, we'll have Sergeant John Alsbergas attend for the next presentation. And just while John is coming down, an opportunity to highlight here for you as the board and the members of the public the excellence around the training, the policy, the application of policy, the interpretation of the law, our supervisory responsibility and accountability process around use of force. And there is a consistent message that is delivered through training regarding the application of the law and justification for use of force, and we remain one of the early services, the early adopters of putting in appropriate policy to support the reporting of use of force, which allows this in analytics. So, Sergeant Alsbergas.
Fortunately, you need some technical.
I think Lois will be able to help you there. Okay, give the password in.
Good afternoon.
Just pull the microphone over to you, please, Sergeant.
Good afternoon. My name is John Alsbergas. I'm the use of force supervisor for the Hamilton Police Service, and I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the use of force statistics for 2013. Okay, under the requirements of the Police Services Act, Regulation 926, and according to our own internal Hamilton Police Service policy and procedure, an officer is required to submit a use of force report under the following circumstances. Whenever an officer draws a handgun in front of a member of the public, points or discharges a firearm, uses a weapon other than a firearm on another person, for example, OC spray, an aspeton, a conducted energy weapon, or any weapon of opportunity. That could be something as like a flashlight, any weapon of opportunity used on a person. Or uses any force where the subject requires medical attention, a report must be submitted. And or when a police service dog bites a subject as the result of canine involvement. And last but not least, whenever a police service horse applies force to a person that results in an injury requiring medical attention. Those are the circumstances under which a use of force report is required to be submitted. With respect to 2013, you can see here our use of force incident rate was approximately 238, or it was in fact 238 reported use of force incidents. This is slightly below our 14-year average of 264 use of force incidents per year. In 2013, there were 238 reported use of force incidents. However, in 48 incidents, officers used more than one response option for a total of 301 options used. For an example, an officer could initially try to attempt to use an empty hand soft technique. That was not successful, so then they would then go to an empty hands hard technique. So even though there was only one use of force incident, it involved more than one use of force response option. In 62 incidents, firearms were discharged. In 2 of them, 2 officers fired their weapons for a total of 64 discharges. And the conducted energy weapons were deployed in 41 incidents. However, in 1 incident, it was used in both the cartridge deployed and push stun mode. And as you can see, I've got a breakdown of all the use of force options used since 2008. When we compare 2013 to 2012, you can see that with respect to total incidents, there's actually been a 23% reduction in the reported use of force rate in 2013. And in fact, there was reductions in most areas, except for firearms discharged. Our incident rate did increase to 62 incidents. However, 60 of those incidents involved the euthanization of animals, which is actually the most frequent and common occurrence for firearms discharge. Okay, with respect to use of force by incident type, I've broken down our use of force incidents into the following categories. One would be considered high-risk arrest. That is where officers had information or had reasonable grounds to believe that their suspect was armed or had access to a weapon. That would be considered a high-risk arrest. Then there are those what we call LLA, Liquor License Act and or disturbance calls, generally involving intoxicated people fighting each other. Then we do have our emotionally disturbed persons calls. Then we do have our dynamic entries. That's generally where we have either members of our emergency response unit tactical team and or members of our specialized vice and drugs, gangs and gun units doing dynamic entries, generally executing warrants, in particularly drug warrants. Then there are those other incidents. That's where it just could be an arrest of any type, arresting a fraud suspect, arresting someone for trespassing, anything like that. And then the other category is animals euthanized. And as you can see, for the last number of years, we do euthanize a fair number of animals. There's always been an interest with respect to use of force and who is in fact using it within the service. And as I think you can easily see, patrol handles most of the calls for service, and they are in fact responsible for 70% of all use of force reports. Our tactical team was only responsible for 23. The other category includes all of our other specialized units and or CID units, all of our investigative service units. And then we do have the odd incident that occurs either within the cells in the custody area or at courts when dealing with prisoners. And then we also have canine involvement. There was one incident where a canine officer was involved. However, the actual canine dog was not used in this incident. And then there are paid duty incidents. And with respect to paid duties, there was only one incident where use of force was used at a paid duty. One of the big things that I find that people are always interested in is police use of conducted energy weapons. As you can see, we really started to record the use of conducted energy weapons in 2005, and in fact, we had 87 incidents in 2005 involving conducted energy weapons. But as you can see, in 2013, there were only 41 conducted energy weapon incidents. And if you actually look at all of this, since 2009, the primary use of a conducted energy weapon at an incident has been in the force display mode, where it was not actually deployed at all, meaning it was not used in a push stun, similar to a stun gun mode, or it was not used in the cartridge deployed mode. So just merely having the weapon there acted as a deterrent, and in fact, no force was used, if you want to look at it like that. And as well, there's always been an interest as to what sort of calls are we using the CEW at. Again, primarily we use them at emotionally disturbed person calls, but as I've already said, in the majority of those cases, it is used in the display mode only, so in fact it is not deployed in either the cartridge deployed or stun gun mode against those individuals. With respect to, I do a complete analysis with respect to use of force incidents by day of the week, use of force incidents by month of the year, and I've also broken it down into by time of day. With respect to month of the year and or day of the week, there's really been no correlation that really stands out saying that, at first you would think that use of force would increase on the weekends. Well, it doesn't, but there's nothing really glaring about that. But the one thing that really does stick out is incidents by time of the day. And in fact, the majority of all use of force incidents generally will occur between 4 o'clock in the afternoon and 4 o'clock in the morning. And we've been keeping this statistic for the last 6 years. 2013 stats, reflect this 6-year average. However, as you can see, that really, with respect to 2013, incidents generally started to increase a little earlier in the day. But the 6-year trend is the bulk of all incidents will occur between 4 in the afternoon and 4 in the morning, which I think totally reflects our rate for calls for service. That's generally when we're going to get the bulk of our calls for service. This is a real highlight of the report. When you consider public contacts versus use of force incidents, and the way we looked at how did we generate total public contacts, well, if you look at, we issued over 67,000 provincial offense notices last year. We did almost 70,000 dispatch calls for service. We did almost 50,000 officer self-initiated calls for service. We did almost 240,000 ride stops. So our total public contact was in excess of 420,000. When you factor into the account that of those 238 use of force incidents, 60 of them involved animal euthanization, so that really dramatically lowers our use of force incident rate with respect to subjects. Less than 0.042% of all contacts actually resulted in a use of force incident. So when you look at that, less than 0.1% would actually result in a use of force reported incident. Any questions?
Well, thank you, John. That was a great presentation. That's a good news story, down 23%. It not only tells me that you're being well trained and they're performing well, it also tells me that the public's respecting police, which is great. And I was a little concerned when I saw that there's 100%, no, it was more than that. Let me get my glasses, 135% increase in the discharge of firearms. I saw 60 of those were for animals and only 2 for other instances. And Councillor Collins was asking me if the moose, did you find that in Ancaster or Moose Kamuskis?
That moose was actually occurred up north. We had Hamilton officers doing a prisoner escort, and I think it actually occurred on the 400 highway, and a moose ran out into the road. And
So we don't have moose in Hamilton then?
Not that's been reported.
Okay. Well, thank you for that presentation. It was well done. Councillor Collins. Oh, Councillor Whitehead.
Well, just a quick question. You indicated that the incident time frame is primarily between 4 p.m. and 4 a.m.
That's correct, sir.
Councillor Collins.
Yep, thanks, Mr. Chairman. And through you, I know the chiefs emphasized, at least in the first couple of meetings that I've been to here at the board, the importance of training and use of force training. How often does that happen within the service, and what kind of resources do we allocate towards it?
Yeah, all of our officers have to attend annual use of force recertification. There is a mandated 8 hours of use of force training that they receive in a 10-hour day. That allows, the 10 hours allows for officers travel to the training facility, break time, and then travel back to their own home stations. But all police training with respect to use of force is mandated by Regulation 926 and policing standards.
Member Chestnuts? Well, Nancy's after you.
I just wanted to say what I've told you before, Sergeant Abelgas, as a board member and witnessing your great work up at the training center, and I think we're very lucky to have you and your great team up there. The service is very, let's say, thank you, Nancy. Very fortunate to have you. Thank you very much for your great work.
Thank you very much, sir, but as much as I like to take all the credit for all the good things, I'm only as good as you've pointed out, as my use of force training team. They truly are fantastic.
Thank you. That's what I meant to say also. Thank you.
And good comments. Member De Caire. Nancy? You didn't have your hand up? Okay. So I see no more questions, so motion to receive the presentation. Moved by Nancy, second by Madeline. All in favor? Carried. Thanks very much, Sergeant. Great news. Chief, do you want to introduce now the Professional Standards Branch report?
Thank you very much, Chair and members of the board. John, thank you for your presentation and for your leadership as always. So what we have just heard in the last two presentations, business process reengineering and efficiencies being gained, cost avoidance being just as important as controlling costs, cost savings, and the accountability measures and training is a huge issue, and John has just spoken to that. What is next deals with the accountability process of the Police Services Act with respect to complaints, and a margin of the measure of the professionalism of any organization is measured through the complaints that are received and what is done by the service with those. And Staff Sergeant Mike Worster is going to take us through a presentation which again is in conjunction with all the other annual reports. Phenomenal news for the Hamilton Police Service. Staff?
Okay, Mike, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chair, board members, fellow police members, and members of the public. Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight. Okay, we'll start off. Just a quick overview of what we're going to discuss tonight. The executive summary, calls for service, the extreme volume of calls that we do. Public complaints, we'll talk about how they're initiated and how they're handled. And we're going to talk about internal investigations, special investigations unit, and then we're going to speak about recognition, and then I'll field some questions at the end there. Excuse me a second here. Okay, so the Professional Development Division is made up of a number of offices. I'm going to speak tonight about the Risk Management Office and the Professional Standards Office. So basically with those two offices and the other ones involving training, human resources, and a couple other ones, we work together, examine and assess organizational needs, and identify areas where opportunities for improvement exist. And then based on that, we try and formulate some action plans and try to improve things. So in the Professional Standards Branch, it's staffed by 1 staff sergeant and 3 detectives and administrative assistant. The responsibility is investigating, facilitating the resolution of both internal complaints, which are generated chief complaints, known as chief complaints, and external complaints, which arise from the OIPRD, the Office of the Independent Review Director. Risk management is staffed by a staff sergeant and they're responsible for identifying, evaluating risks and the development and selection and implementation of control measures that change outcomes. Staff Sergeant Anna Pellizzari is in there right now. So I'd like to start as a segue, we'll talk about calls for service. John Ellsberg has just talked about 420,000 contacts with the police. I'd like to talk about the other stuff that generates calls. So in 2013, the Hamilton Police Service answered 377,590 telephone calls. The call takers, as a result of the calls, the call takers created 204,727 events. And the dispatchers created another 23,117 events. Police officers themselves self-generated 49,631 events. And out of all these contacts, 113 potential complaints received from the OIPRD. Pretty small number, actually, if you consider the amount of contacts that we have as a police service. Out of those 113 complaints, 44 of them were sent back to the service for investigation. 66 of them were screened out by the OIPRD. And a reduction from 2012, which had 159 complaints total. We had 113 last year. It's a reduction of 30% in complaints. Out of those 41, 13 of them were resolved informally. 7 of them were withdrawn after the complainants received further information from the investigators. And out of those total 41, 4 of them were substantiated. This chart here shows the disposition of the conduct complaints that were received from the OIPRD. So as you can see, from 2012 to 2013, informal resolution, out of the 41, 13 of them were resolved informally, 7 of them were withdrawn, 4 were substantiated, and 14 were unsubstantiated. And as of year end, for this report here, 4 of them was still ongoing. We haven't reached a disposition yet. That's out of the 41. Out of the 14 that were unsubstantiated there was a request for 3 reviews through the OIPRD. So what happens is that if the complainant's not happy with the outcome of our investigation, they have the right for a review through the OIPRD. The OIPRD will review it, and then they sent back, in our case here, what they did, they sent back, they said that they supported our investigation, and they were quite happy with the outcome. No further review required. That's a slide for that one. It speaks to that. So there's a five-year chart before you there. It shows the reduction from 2009 of 130 total complaints, 2010 162 total, 2011 152, last year 159, and then this year 113. So quite a dramatic decrease. Now, out of the 41 that we received back from the OIPRD, these are the allegations or the classification of them all. So you can see for this year, 5 of them neglected duty, 19 fall under discreditable conduct, 13 under excessive force, 2 unlawful arrest, 1 corrupt practice, and 1 breach of confidence. And then corresponding numbers for 2012 are there. So as you can see, a reduction. So for clarification, internal investigations, they're into the conduct of any officer, that they're authorized by the chief, an investigation authorized by the chief, and they're usually brought forward by our members. So from this chart here shows for 2013 we had a total number of 208 internal complaints, classified internal complaints. Out of the first number there, 153, the RLC is red light cameras. MVCs, and in that classification also missed court, so officers that failed to attend for court when they're required. The numbers for that are red light cameras. Actually, there was 34 red light camera infractions last year. There was 106 motor vehicle collisions, and there was 13 missed courts. And then the rest, 55, are the internal investigations, giving us a total of 208. That's a drop of 3% over the year from 2012. That's the classification of the alleged misconduct. So you'll see neglected duty 21, discreditable conduct 25, breach of confidence twice, corrupt practice nothing, criminal code nothing, deceit 1, insubordination 4, unlawful use of authority 1, damage to clothing 106. That's actually motor vehicle collisions, so that's not included in the 55. And then we have one harassment and Bill 168 infraction. As of year end there, this is the penalty dispositions for 2013. So 22 disposition without a hearing, 10 of them were written reprimands, 8 were preventive measures, 7 no action taken, 1 officer resigned, nobody retired as a result, and there was 13 outstanding as of the year end last year. The numbers there are higher because some of the investigations involve multiple officers, so there was dispositions going out for a couple officers. Workplace harassment. 2013, we had 1 investigation involving a workplace harassment involving a civilian member, and the allegation of harassment was substantiated, and they were disciplined accordingly under the Hamilton Police Service discipline policy. SIU investigations. So for those of you who don't know, when a police officer involved in an incident where someone is seriously hurt or they die, or there's an allegation of sexual assault, the SIU has a statutory mandate to investigate. So this is what we're going to speak about here. So in 2013, the Hamilton Police Service contacted the SIU 11 times for incidents. Out of those total 11, they came in and invoked their mandate on 9 of them. Out of all 9 completed investigations by the SIU, all the officers were exonerated and found not to be criminally responsible.
We need order, please.
Also under the PDD umbrella, we talk about fail to stop in vehicle pursuits. It's a good news story here. The total number of fail to stop reports submitted for 2013 dropped by 8% when compared to 2012. This shows that the officers and the supervisors are practicing active supervision and good judgment in pursuits. We all know that nobody wins in vehicle pursuits. And there's the number. It's a trend that's going on in the 5-year trend there. So the percentage of discontinued pursuits is rising, so choosing not to pursue. Another good news story. 2013, we received 2,036 good news letters from citizens of the community, and that was up from 222 the year before. A couple of high-profile incidents were driving that. Tim Bosma, a homicide investigation, and the hard work by members was recognized by the members of the community. And then there was the viral YouTube video arrest with Officer Mark Morelli. That also generated a lot of correspondence to the police service. Also, in last year, Hamilton Police Service issued 79 letters of recognition to members of the community for their assistance, recognizing their actions to assist us. And that's up from 34 from 2012. Thanks. Any questions at all?
Well, thank you for the presentation. I have 2 people that have to speak so far, Councillor Whitehead and Councillor Collins.
My first question is, if you have a complaint against an officer, you come in to make your complaint at the police services, are they met by an officer in uniform
Yes.
with that complaint?
Yes, yeah, at the front desk of the stations, yeah.
Has that ever been looked at, whether or not, especially when you talk about different cultural issues and so forth, whether if somebody's going to file a complaint against an officer, that having an officer in uniform to take that complaint would be the best approach, most approachable way of addressing complaints from the citizenry?
Well, there's various ways through the YPRD in which somebody can make a complaint. They can go online and do it completely, as long as they fill out the form and provide their name, they can do it that way if they don't feel comfortable coming in the station to report it. But yeah, we have our officers out at the front desk fielding complaints. They can make a phone call to the ORPRD. It's all on the web. Everybody's pretty tech savvy these days as far as the internet goes, and all the information's on there. As far as specifically looking at that issue, I don't know if there's been anything in the past that's looked at that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think the issue is that if you're going to file a complaint against an officer, you want to make people feel as comfortable as practical in filing that complaint and then having it, the due diligence determine if there's any merit to it or not. The question, though, is when you're dealing with new immigrants or cultural issues, people from third countries, from dominated police-type states, they may feel very uncomfortable of going in and meeting another officer to file a complaint against another officer.
Yep.
They might find it very intimidating, and therefore you're not getting a true representation, maybe the concerns and issues that may be in the community. And I was just looking if we've ever looked at a different approach to receive that type of, to address that kind of issue.
I haven't looked at it personally myself. I know our race relations coordinator goes out and speaks to the different groups that may be affected that way, and the information's there.
And Mike, I think the deputy wanted to respond to that also.
Yeah, I can speak to that. When the OIPRD was generated, it was all looked at in terms of accessibilities, diversity. When they constructed the system, that is why they went online, that they have telephone reporting. They were very conscious of both the diversity component, but also, for want of a better term, how people would feel uncomfortable coming into a station to report that. So they were very deliberate when they constructed the OIPRD, and with Jerry McNeely at the helm, that was one of the things originally contemplated when the whole public complaint system was redesigned and OIPRD took on that role. So the intake can happen without the service involved at the outset. Obviously, we have to get involved, but even the classification system is now done by the OIPD, not by the police service. So those were changes contemplated when they did public consultation on this very issue and then enacted this whole new system.
I appreciate that clarification. Just for clarification, we talked about the SIU and the question is the structure of the SIU, because I think it behooves us to understand who the SIU are. Are they citizens? Are they former officers? Who do they report to? What is the structure of an SIU for the benefit of the listeners?
Yeah, the head of the SIU is a gentleman, Tony Laparco. He's a lawyer. The organization is made up of, there are some ex-police officers there as investigators, but the case managers are all civilians to ensure that there isn't any issues clouded in that way.
So the case managers are civilians?
Yes.
And the investigators are former officers?
Some of the investigators are.
Former officers.
Some like forensic investigators, because that's a specialized knowledge, and police have that training. Ex-police officers have that training.
I just wanted to make sure that we understand who the SIU, and there's civilian oversight.
Yes.
In regards to this investigation, because I think I'd rather operate from a point of knowledge than a point of ignorance. So I appreciate that. You indicated that there was 11 cases went forward from the police services, but there was only an uptake on 9. What would the rationale be for that?
They didn't feel it was within their mandate to investigate. So it could have been something regard that the injury wasn't serious enough that they feel that they would invoke their mandate on that.
That's all my questions.
Thank you.
And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Collins.
Thank you. And I'm just trying to understand the internal process, how that's accommodated from a resource and budget perspective through you, Mr. Chairman. And you certainly don't know at the beginning of the year how many complaints that internally the service would have to deal with. So if, and this report certainly recognizes that these numbers are trending in the right direction, so they're on the downward trend. But if there was a year where they increased, whether it's a third, 25%, pick a number, how is that accommodated then within the work plan internally? And is there a direct budget correlation to having to deal with more internal investigations?
Well, there's a budget. I mean, you know, we assign investigators, so we have to budget for them. It's funny, from my experience being in there, it seems to be an ebb and flow situation where you'll get a lot of investigations, and then you have a bit of a break, and it gives you a chance to catch up on those, and then we get a few more coming in. So I guess to answer your question appropriately, I guess the situation would be assessed at the time, and see if we can devote more resources if need be.
Is there a direct budget correlation to?
Yes, there is, yeah.
There is. How do you establish that at the beginning of the year, knowing it's based on a 3-year average, on a 5-year average?
I'm going to direct you to Superintendent Clark, if you don't mind.
Good afternoon. We have 1 staff sergeant and we have 3 investigators. For the most part, we can make do with that. There is occasions when we have too many investigations, and at that point I approach my deputy, and we usually pull from another area in the organization on a loan basis only. Also on occasions, on very serious matters, we have farmed out investigations to other police services across the province, and they in turn ask us to do the same. So we work a reciprocal relationship like that.
Okay, so during those periods where there'd be a lull in the action, so to speak, where there might be situations where there's a lull, that would be the time when we lend resources to other services? Is that the case, or it's on a, we wait for the call, so to speak, to come in and respond at that point in time?
To be honest, we don't really have a lull. There's never a point where we don't have enough to do.
Okay.
But we do those investigations for other services as needed. So when they get a big case that they think it needs an outside jurisdiction to take over, we'll do that for them.
And at what point in time would you need to restructure then to accommodate, in a worst case scenario, how would you need to provide more resources? What's the litmus test in terms of the number? And we see the numbers now, and it sounds like things are under control with the current resources. If we reach a certain point where that number increases.
That's hard to base on numbers because every investigation is unique. Some investigations require a lot more resources than other ones, obviously. So I mean, it's like I say, it's a fluid decision-making process, and we make do as we go.
Perhaps I could weigh in on this. For example, at the start of the year, as a parallel, as an analogy, we had 4 homicides in attempt in 9 days. So what we did is borrow resources from the division. Divisional detectives were seconded to the homicide unit. Now, they had 29 active cases before the courts as well, plus the ongoing investigations, plus cold cases. So that was a resource allocation that we made at this level, allocated for basically 3.5 months with a review period. We've now pulled back half of those investigators that we assigned, and then the rest will be coming in back at the end of the month. That's fairly unusual, but so was the start of the year. So we keep ahead of the curve. Similarly with our complaints and/or criminal investigation, it really depends on the complexity of the investigation. Some can be very straightforward. Some can be months in terms of the investigation, the number of witness contact, all the rest. So in terms of a volume coming in the door, predictability of that, somewhat difficult. However, we have the capacity to expand out to those other areas. Again, if we borrow criminal investigators from our other areas for some of our internal matters, depending again on the complexity, time, duration, all those. I don't know that we can do a direct correlation, but we did do a restructure about 4 years ago with the Professional Development Division and with Professional Standards Branch overseeing these investigations, doing risk management, quality control, and we resynthesized that branch, and I think it's paying off in terms of centralization, efficiency, knowledge about both Police Service Act and Criminal Code offenses, because they do travel very different paths, so we need that capacity.
Thanks for that. And it sounds like it really is just a constant shifting then of resources. And you know, as the presentation was unfolding, I was trying to understand, you know, how do you budget for that? Because you really don't know from one year to the next what you're going to face. And so that's what I was trying to wrap my head around there. But I appreciate the presentation and the answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I see no other people asking questions. Just a couple questions. First of all, congratulations on the 75% reduction on the complaints in the service. and all SIU investigations being cleared. That's a good statistic to have. You had a tremendous spike in the numbers of letters of commendation or good newsletters, I think you called them, from 222 to 2,036. And I said a lot of them were because of the Bosma murder.
Correct.
And also because of that video of, is it Constable Morelli or that went viral? Can you break those down? How much for Bosma and how much for the Morelli?
Sorry, I don't have those stats.
You don't have them?
No.
I would just be curious whether we're back closer to the 222 we had in prior years.
I don't have the stats, so I apologize for that.
Okay. That's all my questions. So seeing no other questions, thanks very much. And motion to receive, Councillor Collins, Councillor Whitehead, all in favor? Carried. You had a question, Madeline? Okay, sorry.
Just wanted to address about the access in terms of where the, so when I was in New York, 12 meeting, I noticed that they had a full display of the pamphlets for the OIRPD and written in, I don't know, a dozen languages, was it? Maybe more. So I don't remember where that particular place is in the, as you enter into it. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit? And also online, to answer Terry's question, it's in multiple languages. So really, for newcomers, people of different backgrounds, there are numerous languages for them to make the access to it extremely. But in terms of looking where it is at the, can you just, because again, people can come in, they don't have to go, and they can maybe pull up one of those pamphlets as I saw in New York.
You have the online access that is available to everyone, and as you indicated, in multiple languages. There is a requirement within the legislation that the forms be available at the front desk of every police facility. They are. There's also a requirement that 3 posters be posted there, clearly visible to the public. They are. Jerry McNeely's office also does random province-wide audits, secret shopper, if you will, and they come in and they make the inspections of the police facility. We were the subject of one of those audits last year and were found to be in compliance, with the exception that at one station we had 2 posters posted and we were supposed to have 3, so we put up the 3rd poster and we're in 100% compliance. The other thing that remains part of our history is that we, in order to address the issue of people coming into a police facility, we did for many, many years operate an off-site professional standards bureau, which allowed people to go away from the police facility. And what we found over a great number of years is that was not effective in the public access to it. So we cut the expenses of running an additional office and renting an additional facility when the new legislation took place. So it is entirely accessible, and culture and diversity is taken into consideration.
And it's in Braille as well, I noticed, so.
That's what I did.
My issue was more concerned about, we talk about culture now, but it's about people with the mental health issues or limitations that may have a bona fide complaint, intimidated by somebody in uniform and very limited in regards to the ability to write or articulate it in writing. And how do we accommodate those shortfalls was very concerning to me. So maybe if you haven't answered that, it's great. But that's where I'd like to focus it, because there are people out there that I want to make sure that when we talk about a process, I think we do a good job in regards to all those other areas we identified, but is there one element of this community that we work with to ensure that they have the same type of access to these processes?
Part of the legislative change and the requirement was that the OIPRD take on the responsibility for that and prohibit the services from actually participating in intake. We don't do that anymore. We facilitate the process. And I know from speaking directly to Jerry and his staff, they are well-versed in multiple languages, they're well-versed in different technologies, and they are well-versed in providing support to any member of the public that wishes to make a complaint.
Okay, thanks very much, Mike, for your presentation. Chief, we'll move on now to crime stats.
Thank you very much, Chair and members of the board. This is a presentation to be made, and I believe that Rita Lee Irvine is here from corporate planning. I want to recognize the work that is put in by our corporate planning folks, and that's Rita Lee Irvine and Debbie Gifford. And it's an incredible team of two that do an awful lot of work for the service in terms of research, statistical reporting, and analysis. They provide for us the opportunity to strategically deploy our officers in response to crime. I've had an opportunity to review this, which is an excellent report, and again, a very strong indicator of the direction that our strategies are moving in Hamilton with respect to the reduction of crime, the reduction of violence, and in fact, making our city a safer city. So over to you, Rita, for the presentation.
This one.
Mr. Chair, members of the Police Services Board, Chief, Deputy Chiefs, ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of this presentation is to review the trends for selected violent crimes, property crimes, and drug offenses in Hamilton over the past 5 years, with special focus on the last two. My name is Rita Lee Irvin. I'm the Corporate Planning Manager. First, a brief explanation of the data source. For this report, we use the occurrence statistics report from the niche database, and we use the UCR codes, which stand for Uniform Crime Reporting Codes, and we use the corporate planning template, which is a special template that was designed by our niche resource team for us to use for 3 important benefits. Number 1, in addition to the number of incidents, the percentage change, we also can get clearance rate, the number of adults charged, and the number of youth charged and not charged for each of the offenses. We also, as every police service in Canada, have to code the incident first by using a set of established scoring rules from StatsCan, and then before they can submit it to StatsCan through the standardized Uniform Crime Reporting Survey, we know that we have data consistency for comparison for public reporting. So that's a very important benefit. And thirdly, we also have comparability and with other police services. So that makes for benchmarking processes in the later time. Violent crimes are crimes against the person. Over the past 5 years, our crime stats in terms of violent crime, we follow the trend in the nationally, and we see decreases in assault, 7% change. Robbery has been reduced by 31%, but however, we also see increase in homicides and attempt murders and sexual offenses. Looking at the year-over-year comparison, we are seeing increases in homicide as well as sexual offenses. So let's look at the homicides in detail. Last year, all 13 murders were solved, were cleared. And then we also note that the number of adults charged has increased, has doubled, and continued to increase last year. In terms of attempt murders, the clearance rate is 100%, and the number of adults charged has dropped by half. Sexual offenses, the clearance rate has decreased somewhat from 44% to 40%, and the numbers of adults charged has increased from 65 to 71, and the number of youth charged and not charged has also decreased quite a bit, almost by half. In terms of assaults, the clearance rate again has increased a little bit from 70% to 71%, and the number of adults charged has dropped considerably. And the number of youth charged and not charged has more than doubled, or it dropped significantly over the past 5 years as well as last year. In terms of robbery, although the clearance rate has dropped somewhat, we are seeing significant results in the reduction of the incidents, also in the numbers of adults charged, and the number of youth charged and not charged. This is really one significant success story since the implementation of our action anti-violence strategy over the past 5 years. Property crime. Similar to the national downward trend of property crime, we are seeing decrease in break-and-enters, in theft over $5,000, in theft under $5,000, as well as in fraud over the past 5 years. And the one area that we have concern over is the theft of motor vehicles. It has a 66% increase in theft of motor vehicles over the past 5 years. When we look at the year-to-year, year-over-year comparisons, we're really happy to show that we see decreases in all of these 5 property crimes. Break and enter clearance rate has fallen from 14% to 11%. The number of adults charged has decreased quite a bit from over the past 5 years and continue to drop. And in terms of the youth charged and not charged, we are seeing a really significant decrease. Theft of motor vehicles, that's the area that we are concerned about. And the clearance rate has fallen from 5% to 4.8%. And the numbers of adults charged, however, has fallen, and then the youth charge and not charge has reduced from 53 to 22. Theft over $5,000, the reduction in clearance rate from 11% to 6.8%, and the number of adults charged also dropped by half. And then in terms of the theft under $5,000, we are seeing an increase in the clearance rate from 16% to 20%, and the number of adults charged has also increased, tripled over the last year, and the youth charged and not charged also has increased quite a bit. In terms of fraud, the clearance rate has fallen from 36% to 23.4%. And the numbers of adults charged has decreased significantly, and the youth charged and not charged also has decreased. The last portion of the presentation looks at the drug offenses, which is the drug enforcement efforts of the Hamilton Police. Over the past 5 years, drug possession, we are seeing an increase of 56%. And in terms of drug importation and production, we are seeing an almost 10% increase. However, we are seeing a reduction in the drug trafficking charges, and 18.77%, resulting in overall drug crimes 36% increase. Over the last year, we continue to see increase in drug possession as well as drug importation and production. However, we're seeing a really significant reduction in drug trafficking, resulting in overall drug crime of slight 2.66% reduction. Now, let's look at the drug possession over the past 5 years. And clearance rate has increased a little bit from 96% to 98%. And the number of adults charged has increased, although the youth charged and not charged has decreased, which is a good news story for us. Now, let's look at the breakdown of the drug possession charges, offenses. Over the last 2 years, over 2/3 or 3/4 of the drug possession charges have to do with the possession of cannabis, followed by 22% or 16% with the possession of cocaine, and followed by 10% and 9% for the possession of other Schedule I drugs. In terms of the drug trafficking, the clearance rate has increased a little bit from 96% to 97.33%, and the adults charge has fallen from 504 to 322, and while the number of youth charged and not charged has increased from 32 to 39. That is of concern to us, definitely. Now, in terms of the drug trafficking breakdown, the 2 years follow a different pattern. In 2012, 43% of the trafficking has to do with cocaine, followed by 36% in the trafficking of cannabis, and then 16% in other Schedule I drugs. In 2013, last year, the highest percentage was 39%, and it has to do with the trafficking of cannabis. And then the second one, it was 34% for trafficking of cocaine, followed by 24% with the trafficking of other Schedule I drugs. Importation and production of drugs. The clearance rate has fallen significantly from 79% to 64% over the last year. And although the number of charges we're really concerned about has almost doubled from 24 to 45. And the number of adults charged has also increased, more than doubled last year. And the number of youth charged and not charged has been reduced from 5 to 1. So in terms of the breakdown of the drug importation and production offenses, they too follow a different pattern for the last 2 years. In 2012, 75% of the drug importation and production charges or offenses have to do with the importation and production of cannabis, while the other quarter is with the other drug charges. And in last year, 87% is for the importation and production of cannabis, and then 9% for the other CDSAs, and 4% for other Schedule I drugs. That concludes the presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Rita. And Councilor Collins, you have a question?
Yes, thanks. I guess with all of the, through you, Mr. Chairman, with all of the changes that are occurring in the United States and the federal discussion around cannabis laws, how would the work plan, and maybe this is a hypothetical question, but has HPS talked about what happens if, in fact, cannabis laws are changed? How does the work plan then change to reflect that, and what kind of resources are freed up? So I understand the chiefs have taken on that in the past in terms of what their views are on the legalization of cannabis. But in the event that it does change, and that may come someday soon, what happens to these statistics, and where do the resources then go in that event?
I would have to refer this question to the chief.
Question for the chief.
I think we have to recognize that if the Parliament changes the legislation, we will certainly comply with the legislation. That said, we also need to be very cognizant of the history that is laid out here in Hamilton. The search report, which was done a number of years ago, and Inspector Anderson worked on that committee, dealt with substance use-related crime in Hamilton. And what we saw in that, and I don't have the report in front of me, but off the top of my head, what we saw was the residual impact of crime in different areas of the city that increases as a result of the availability of drugs, and then, of course, the addictions and the services that are required to support people who suffer those vulnerabilities. It is very difficult to say at this point what the impact potentially could be. We do know that in that report, 100% of people that were arrested for financial institution robberies had previous drug convictions. We know that a high percentage, I forget what it was, but convenience store robberies, confectionery robberies, all had a previous drug convictions. It is clear in the research that was done here in Hamilton that it is a much more complex issue than the issue of marijuana alone. And this service does not support the decriminalization or legalization of marijuana based on that report and that excellent work that was done, because we saw evidence of the impact on our communities. And the reason that we have the strategy is because of our rich history. So although we would comply with whatever the government puts into legislation, I think it's a much more complex discussion that needs to be had regarding proper social supports, proper issues of addiction, proper health care. It is not just a policing issue. So I really can't, at this point, without having that dynamic before us, it would just be speculation on our part. Much like the complaints, we will adjust and we will switch our resources to the ebb and flow. What we do know is that from 2009 to 2013, a 55% increase in charges later, and 75% of that being around marijuana use. It doesn't mean that legalization means that the issues are going to go away. In fact, we need to be prepared in policing for what may be compounded as a result of the behaviors of those that are ingesting drugs. So it's a very difficult question.
I appreciate that answer, and I ask that in the context of, it seems like a lot of the statistics are centered around, the highest numbers, at least from the presentation, were centered around the cannabis issue, whether it was the trafficking, which it was 1 or 2 in a couple of categories, in terms of the arrests that were made in relation to that. And so it would be a fairly significant shift to the work plan, understanding there new priorities may arise. The fact that it's occurring in the U.S. and it's now being debated at the federal level, I ask that just in the context of understanding what that would mean to the service in terms of shifting priorities is probably the best term to use. If I could ask through you in terms of the, I mean, we're in a fairly fortunate situation where much of the numbers that were presented in the presentation are trending in the right direction. That seems to be the theme today in terms of the reports that we're getting, which is certainly good news. In a perfect world, these numbers would be right down to the bottom, but they're not, and we know that they're not going away in their entirety. How does the work plan then change from year to year? When you see significant, or we see collectively significant improvements in certain areas, we're working from a business plan, and the business plan is driven by resources, budgets. When you see significant improvements in an area, it's not as if we want to abandon our focus or attention on some of these things, but I wonder how we shift, and it's sort of some of the last question I had in the last presentation. How do we internally then shift resources to accommodate in areas where there may be an increase? How does that happen from a budget perspective and even a work plan perspective on an annual basis?
So it's a very interesting question, and although the trends and the numbers are very positive for the overall safety of our community, they also represent some very significant challenges for us. As Rita pointed out, last year, 13 homicides. The deputy earlier spoke to the frequency of the homicides at the beginning of this year. Again, no crime analysis, not predictive. There's nothing that we're going to be able to do in an effort to predict and then, of course, prevent unless we have up and running projects in those areas. So homicides continue to be a challenge on the resource. Sexual offenses and the rise in sexual offenses, particularly the rise in sexual offenses that are around the issues of victimizing children. The other area that is very problematic, that is creating a very significant demand in policing everywhere, is the issue of child exploitation over the internet. And those investigations, we just finished one here in Hamilton about a month and a half ago, and the seizure of one computer with over 700,000 images on it. So again, that only counts as one, but that is one huge investigation. So in that work plan, having the ability to size, as the deputy mentioned, the complexity of the issue presenting is very challenging. From a budget perspective, one of the things that we have identified many years ago and have been working towards is the implementation of a more complex time and resource management strategy, the ability to project code out these investigations. So we can say that we have one homicide as compared to another homicide. The complexity of that homicide requires more resources, more time, more investment, as opposed to not minimizing in any way, shape, or form, but a rather straightforward homicide. Again, they cost different things. So we need to build that system that properly gives us the ability to project code those things. We'll be able to answer those questions in a much more profound way when we have those systems that are built. We do have some other business to do this evening that speaks to those issues. I think the issue of flexing our staff is one that we are never actually going to pin down to a measurement metrics, given the nature of crime, given the complexity of crime, given the frequency of crime. I think it is something that senior people, senior supervisors, experienced police officers need to be able to come to the command and identify verbally those challenges and issues. And we watch very carefully what is emerging. A number of years ago, we also put in place the crime analysis system, which we are now building. And we have positions that have been identified to build that process, which give us the more predictive ability to deploy our people into more strategic places. John Alsbergas pointed out time and dates for use of force incidents. We can map that over top of geographic areas. We can map that over top of crime reported. It gives us a much more strategic way to deploy our officers. I've said it many times in the public, driving around randomly looking for criminals, it just doesn't work. It's very expensive. Or driving around in anticipation of calls for service doesn't work either, because there has to be a balance of workload. So while we're building those systems, I don't think we'll ever get to the point where it fits into a metrics, as much as our job is very fluid, because keeping in mind, we do not control demand. We control supply. We do not ever control demand.
And thanks for that, Chief. And I ask that in the context of this business is very statistic-driven. Almost every meeting, every report we receive is full of numbers that show trends in one direction or another, and there are budget numbers attached to it. And what I've heard is that, and the Chief just referenced it in terms of homicides as a for instance, we don't know how many we're going to experience in a year, but someone at the beginning or prior to the start of the calendar year needs to determine what amount of resources we're going to allocate for certain components of the services that HPS delivers to the community. And it's a guess. Again, it's you know, we can't predict these things. So I'm trying to understand in a year where those stats are down in certain areas, how then are those resources reallocated? And how does the board then interact with senior staff to talk about the prioritization of those services? So I know over at the city, we've wearing a different hat over the last 10 years. We've really into activity-based costing, so we know how much it costs per hour for the HSR and how much it costs for a rec center, and our winter maintenance activities have been studied to death. And I'm sure we have a good handle here in terms of what our own costs are, but I think, Chief, you just highlighted it's not by activity, but you could probably tell us how much it costs the service to investigate 13 homicides in a year. All of those cases are different, but somehow we have to budget for them. And I'm trying to get at this whole issue of these stats are given to us for a reason. This board eventually will either endorse or not a new business plan at some point in time in the future, and it will be in large part based on the statistics you're giving us. And I'm trying to make the correlation between the stats you're giving us and the budgets that are requested, because the budgets will drive service. I know that's kind of a complex question to ask, but I liked what the chief was just saying in terms of getting to the point where you can start to put numbers to those activities. The budgets aren't presented that way, really. They're presented in staffing levels and by division and by department, but it doesn't tell us what the outputs are. So I'm sorry to monopolize the time here with this, but it does raise a lot of questions in terms of the statistics that have been provided.
Through you, Mr. Chair, crime reduction is but one of the performance indicators of our good public safety. And you mentioned the business planning process. It's really a good time to talk about that, because next year we'll be starting the business planning process again, where we'll bring in the community members as well as the senior staff, all members of the service representing the ranks and file, and also the board members. And so that would be the opportunity to look at all the crime stats, look at all the budget implications, and look at all of the trends in the society, the technology and social trends, political trends, as well as anything that would affect the community. So that would be the opportunity where we can really have a good discussion as to how we go about in the next 3 years.
And are those budgets, or sorry, those plans then, are they presented in a way where it says, or might allow someone to look at the service from a budget perspective? So X amount of resources were provided for drug prevention service. X amount of resources were provided for traffic safety. And I don't believe in the past that it's been illustrated, because the community certainly turns to their elected representatives and by extension board members through the planning process and would say, well, traffic in my neighborhood is increasingly more of a concern for me. I would like you to increase the budget. If you haven't shown the community what the budget is for traffic enforcement, if I just use that as the example, it's difficult for the community to gauge whether or not they'd like to see an increase in resources in that area or not. And you know, the service doesn't happen without someone paying for it. And so I guess I'm trying to get at to where the chief says there may come a day where we can start to gauge our response internally for each area. You could use the areas that were provided today, and you could start to debate whether we need more resources or less resources.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's why we do resource allocation studies. And every few years, we look at the workload for the patrol officers. We also look at the workload for the investigators and even the civilian staff. Each branch, when they have a new program, they would evaluate the success of that. So that's based on what were the goals set intended for that particular program or for that particular division, and then we evaluate its success and whether we should continue with certain programs as well.
And that's an internal process.
That's an internal process leading up to the business planning process.
And are those numbers and plans disclosed as part of the business planning exercise?
We do that, and it includes the board. And it includes the members of the public as well. And it's multiple sessions where they get to prioritize the issues that they want to see the Hamilton Police Service work on in the board's business plan. And then the board's budget is built around that. You're saying the things that we have said around the table for many, many years, the workload study, the 60-40 deployment model, all of those issues about how we serve a community. And we work towards meeting those goals. The problematic issue is an officer on patrol spends X number of hours in a day on traffic enforcement, X number on crime prevention, X number on criminal investigation. The systems are not built to capture that level of complexity. That's one of the business systems that we've been prioritizing for many years to get to that stage. You can do that. I've seen that done, and we will have the ability to do that. Workload analysis, distribution of work, balance of work, the work that was done in this service over 10 years ago, I have reviewed in relation to the deployment of our people the busyness of each of those officers. That's one of the reasons that we've put a new zone car into the mountain, Central Mountain, because the busyness of the 4 major beats was outstripping the availability of resources. We've supplemented into that area with an additional patrol car. We make those assessments based on the analysis that is provided by Rita and her team, and we can identify them by budget, by the dollar. The issue is going to be to break down their workload within that area.
And I ask it in the context of, we use the homicides as an example. You couldn't certainly plan for the fact that you'd have 13 or 14 in a calendar year. Somehow you have to pay for the investigations that flow from that. You probably haven't budgeted for that at the beginning of the year. So work plans then get affected because a good nature of, or a portion of this business is reactive, because things happen, you have to deal with it. Something doesn't get done in a year where you don't have 13 homicides. And that's what I'm trying to get at. When certain things happen, you don't anticipate, you haven't budgeted for it, the resources within the budget that's been established get taken from one area and they're transferred somewhere else. Somehow, something on the work plan isn't getting done. And I'm not sure how we're accommodating for that. That's what I'm trying to figure out through a calendar year where we have these spikes. You're taking officers from one area of the organization, you're investing them somewhere else. It's something that can't be avoided. And there's a consequence to that. We're living without something. And I don't know what those services are that we're living without. They're certainly not, I don't know if that's a year-end process that the board goes through that says we had anticipated doing X because of these homicides. I just use that as an example. We didn't do these things within our divisions or departments. How does that flow through to the board, or does it?
There is, in the business planning process, there's a statistical program that is utilized by all of the divisions, all the commanders, to have all of their members submit all of their work. And that report comes forward to the board, and I think you're going to see it here. It lays out all of the efforts to achieve the board's business plan in great detail. So you can actually spend an awful lot of time breaking it down right to each performance measurement metrics that we have available to us, keeping in mind that I don't believe that the systems are built completely enough to support where it is that we know we need to go.
Questions? Member Station, Irene?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Chief. Chief, you already referred to this in your comments to Councillor Collins, but could you tell me why there was a 29% increase last year, sexual assaults against children?
This is one of the areas that really does challenge the service, and we need to keep in mind that in relation to all issues of sexual assault, research in having people come forward to report sexual assaults, we believe that sexual assaults are significantly underreported in cities. But the issue with respect to the increase in child sexual assault can be identified in many ways. It can be more disclosures. It can be more education programs by our officers. It can be more presentations at the schools in relation to bullying and texting and sexting, which is a part of our common dialogue now with students in schools, provided by our school resource officers. There can be many avenues that will increase that reporting. Our problem is, particularly around the internet use of child exploitation, is the order of magnitude of the investigations and what we need to do in order to discover the evidence. Execution of search warrants, seizure of computers, analysis of computers, dealing with internet providers, offshore servers, all of those things which can dramatically increase the complexity of an investigation. Some people will look at our numbers and see the numbers are 25, 35, they're low, that's good. That's bad because the issue is the order of magnitude of those investigations. And as I mentioned, one of our last seizures, over 700,000 images. We have to go in, review, categorize, and let's remember that what we're actually trying to do in that is to protect victims of crime and to actually save people who are being exploited in that way. So while, again, the number may be low and only count as one, it could be a very, very significant investigation that we're involved in, which then challenges the performance in budget and staffing and resources and causes us to pull our people together. But what we have to do is we have to do everything possible to protect victims of crime, and that's why we are as fluid as we are, given the emerging crime trends of the day.
One of the things that was identified, and I'm not sure if it was in this presentation, but certainly in an earlier presentation, because I asked the question specifically, and this is back to Councillor Collins, targeting resources appropriately. And what was clearly indicated in the earlier presentation is that the majority of incidents are taking place between 4 p.m. and 4 a.m. Your information supporting that?
What you were referring to there is Sergeant Alsbergast's presentation on use of force and use of force incidents taking place predominantly between 4 p.m. and 4 a.m. The distribution of calls for service, although they do escalate through the day, we have done an awful lot of work, and that was done under the leadership of Deputy Chief Gert with respect to the shift scheduling program. We went through that 2 years ago, analyzed all of our calls for services in time, day of the week, nature of the calls, priority of the calls, and we looked at our staffing availability. And through the team, which was made up of many members across the service, including the Hamilton Police Association, come up with a new shift schedule that we implemented. Last year was the first full year of implementation, where we adjusted hours of our officers to more strategically match the calls for service and the demand. So we don't have a lot of police officers out there when there's not a lot of calls for service, and then we're short when there are a lot of calls for service. That work has already been done, and it's been signed off and agreed by the association.
So that 4 p.m. to 4 a.m., does that align with the calls for services?
Somewhat, it does. The use of force incidents go further into the morning than into the early hours of the morning than do the calls for service. Predominantly calls for service, and it's different in each of the divisions, but around 1, 2 in the morning start to drop off, and we play catch up with the night's calls, depending on, of course, how busy the night was. And then we see generally the rise in calls starting at around 9, 10 a.m. in the morning, building through the early afternoon, and peaking out at the 11, 12 o'clock at night.
So is it safe to say that the peak of our deployment in regards to the minimums in each division would be between 4 p.m. and 4 a.m.?
No. The minimums are in the collective agreement for the purpose of establishing consistent standards. We have maneuvered our officers through the collective agreement with the association to try and better match the calls for service. But those minimums are 24-hour across the board.
That's all of my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Rita, that's all
Thank
we
you.
got. So a motion to receive. Walt, second by Chad. All in favor? Carried. Now, members of the board, we have one left, 2.8. I know some of you said you had you're on timeline. The chief says this is one we could defer till the next meeting. However, staff are here. What's your wish? Do we run the risk of losing quorum later in the night? What time do you have to be gone, Nancy? Okay, you can move anything you like.
The next report to the next board meeting because it's not time sensitive.
Okay, is there a seconder to that? Second by Walt. Staff okay with that, Chief? Do we defer this? Okay, I know we brought them all out tonight away from their families, but we do have a long agenda ahead of us yet. So all in favor of the motion to defer? Opposed? That carries. Thanks for coming out. And we'll see you next month. Is there any declarations of interest before we move on to the rest of the agenda? Seeing none, there is consent items, and before I call for motion on all consents, I'll just walk through them. We got 4.2, adoption of minutes. I'm going to do them all at once then. Just if anybody has any questions. 4.3, the monthly report. 4.4, any of the information items. Councilor Collins moves all the consent items. Seconded by Nancy. All in favor? Carried. Discussion items. There's a correspondence from Chief De Caire with respect to the Police Service Board meeting of March 17th. Throw it in.
Yeah, just in addition, because I believe there's correspondence from both the chief and from the Seniors Association. I also want to add that I did have a direct discussion. I'm not sure if you did, Mr. Chairman, but I had a direct discussion with Mike Thomas, on behalf of the association he represented, relative to the delegation issues and the concerns he raised and providing clarity in that discussion. So I just wanted to highlight that because there's no letter here before us from that particular largest association, and I want to make clear that it doesn't mean that we're not concerned that were raised from the association, and that I did have a direct discussion with Mr. Thomas. Whatever you got.
Well,
Mr. Chair, this is regarding 5.1, items 5.1.
correct. Which is the letters from the President of the Senior Association, the Chief.
I would like to address this through you, Mr. Chair.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I would like to address items 5.1 of March the 19th, signed by Chief Glenn De Caire and Deputies Lingerst and Gert. And also the must-read email circular to all HPS members that followed, and the letters of March 20th, signed by Jamie Anderson, President of the HPS Senior Officers Association. As a community member, as a citizen appointee board member, and acting chair at the time of Mr. Dorr's deputation, I take sole responsibility and liberty as vice chair and acting chair, if any, to allow Mr. Dorr to speak and have his 5 minutes as set forth by this board. Chief De Caire, the service had the ability to respond. The response was not restricted by this board, as was not the deputation of Mr. Dorr's time to speak. Out of the respect to him and the Mesic family, it is my opinion that a loss of life is tragic, whether it be a member of our community or our police service. They are one of the same. I take it to heart a mother and father losing their son, a son never knowing his dad, a fiancé not realizing a husband, and 2 of our frontline service members having to live with this for the rest of their lives. Mr. Dorr was speaking for a family of this community with overwhelming frustration, emotion, and passion. It is unfortunate that the circumstance surrounding Mr. Dorr's presentation took place at our last board meeting. In order to ensure that the board continues its openness, transparency, and provide an opportunity for deputations, as well as support the great work of our women and men of the Hamilton Police Service. The board will be reviewing its policy for deputations. I did not take this circumstance or these letters lightly. I apologize to Chief De Caire and the service during the last board meeting. A barrage of misstatements, verbal attacks, to be publicly maligned, inaccurate, false, misleading statements, and denigration is experienced by our frontline sworn members of the Hamilton Police Service on a daily basis, not just during a deputation. Where I come from, it is a part of customer service. One deputation should not erode the trust formed between this community and the police, nor should it take away the respect that the Hamilton Police Service has garnered since its inception in 1833. The board demonstrated this trust with its impartiality by allowing Mr. Dorr to speak. I would like to defer these letters for the next meeting so that I can meet with Mr. Jamie Anderson and the executive of the Senior Officers Association. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks, you, Walt. I don't see anybody else putting their hand up. Nancy?
There are two things, through you, Mr. Chair, that I would like to address. One is I feel that it should have been extremely important for a letter from Mr. Thomas to have come to the full board. I regret that a discussion just occurred with one member of the board. With regards to the last deputation, what we need to be cognizant of, the fact is that that deputation did not follow policy. And as a result of which, unfortunately, things did not go the way they should have gone when a deputation was presented. Any complaints with regards to any member of the service, and I regard Deputy and the Chief as members of the service, any complaint needs to go to the OIPRD. The deputation policy clearly states that complaints with regards to the members of the service need to go to OIPRD. And members of this service should not have been belittled and berated through a deputation.
Thank you. Councilor Whedon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't going to say anything until we got to the policy, but we need to clear the air. So I want to make it clear that when the chair of the Police Service Board, the acting chair, I was attending the agenda review, and the acting vice chair, or the vice chair at the time, wasn't available. He had asked me if I would be interested in attending because it'd be his first time, and I volunteered to be at the agenda review to help facilitate and assist him in the agenda review. When the Mr. Dorr deputation request came in, the first question I asked our administrator, who is in fact the overseer of our policy, not the chief, it's our administrator, I was told it met the policy. And I said, if it meets the policy, then we can't deny it. Then, Mr. Chair, subsequent to that, we had the deputation. Could have it been handled differently? I think that's open to pretty transparent. Each and every member of this board, at any point in time, could have interjected, point of order, or made a comment in response to the deputation. The second piece, Mr. Chair, is that subsequent to that discussion, again, I asked our administrator with two of the representatives from this board whether, in fact, it met the policy. And again, it was reiterated, it in fact did meet the policy. In fact, there are many examples of presentations and deputations before us in the last couple of years that were consistent with the approach of this deputation. In fact, Mr. Chair, not under your chairmanship, but past chairman's positions in that I think Councilor Morale and maybe even Nancy, there was requests that came in exactly the same way and were approved. and came to this board. So clearly, do we need to change the deputation policy, or at least review it and make the necessary changes? Amen to that. I have no problem facilitating and assisting that. But in no way should a deputation be sanitizing people coming forward and providing not just good cheerleading and congratulatory messaging to the police and the police services, but in fact, because it's an open, transparent, and accountable process, and understanding the Police Services Act, nothing prevents, if people believe that the service, or there's some shortfalls within the service, and they have some grievances that cannot be met under the current processes that are in place, they should be enabled to come before this board and make that presentation. And to suggest for even a moment, this is what upsets me.
Okay, clearly upset.
This is what upsets me, that we would endorse the position because the deputation was allowed is naive. It's simply naive. The reality is, in a democracy, people should be allowed to come forward as long as they meet the policies of the day, and there's plenty of opportunity through the chair and through the board members that sit around this table to interject through points of order or make fair and clear presentations or representations that take place. Even in that particular occasion, I know that the chair offered the opportunity, and the chief did respond in regards to the SIU investigations and the findings of the SIU. So he certainly did a very good job in clarifying some of the what felt was misrepresenting the circumstances that was reflected in that deputation. That deputation started focusing on a mission statement that Mr. Dorr felt should be one that we adopt. Then it veered off, and that's where things went south. And that's where each and every one of us should take responsibility and should have addressed that, not as one individual, but as a board. So certainly going forward, Mr. Chair, I have no problem making the appropriate amendments to the agenda, but to suggest for a moment that it didn't meet the policy is misleading. It's not true.
Okay, and as chair, I don't really want to go back on this. I want to look ahead. And I understand once we receive these letters or defer them, if that's the decision is, that we're going to hear a motion to change the deputation policy. And so I'll come back to my comments at the end, but I have Councillor Collins and then Nancy. Chad?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And just when I received the correspondence, I had verified that, in fact, the deputation at the time had met the policy. I wasn't here when the policy was established, so I had to ask my questions after the fact. I do find it odd, and I've shared it privately, certainly with you and with the board when we've had this discussion. It's an awkward situation where deputations are approved by one individual, the chairperson, whether it be you or someone who's working in your stead while you're away. And so I find that situation odd. It's not a system that we're accustomed to utilizing at the city, where the requests for delegation status are debated in this forum, in public. They're actually part of the agenda, and there's the opportunity for board members to vote by majority on whether or not it meets the test that's been adopted by, in the instance that I'm referring to, council. So I had already forwarded the board members last evening a notice of motion that seeks to align the current Police Services Board policy more in line with what the city has adopted in the past. And our process maybe isn't perfect, but it's been without controversy, knock on wood, for quite some time. And so I think it's one that works. And I don't really think there's a need to reinvent the wheel. The current system that this board has worked hard on over the years, always looking to improve it, I think is a good thing. But just based on this past instance and circumstance, I think it highlights the fact there's a little bit room for improvement. And so I don't know if now is the appropriate time. We are essentially receiving correspondence. I do have that notice of motion. I had intended to put it at the end of the meeting under, I believe it's on other business. And I had I made the suggestion that in fact it may be a good idea either there's a desire to pass it here today to clear the air on this issue, so be it. I know we have a governance meeting that's scheduled shortly. There could be a referral there as well if there needs to be further discussion. But it seems like a simple issue to solve. We want to be open, we want to be transparent with our decisions, and I think instead of these decisions being made at the agenda review process, which is out of sight and out of mind for the public, they should be made at the board level, and they should be formally part of the agenda. So those are my comments, and I certainly appreciate the other board members' points of view as well.
Nancy?
To you, Mr. Chair, I want to reiterate that that deputation did not follow policy. I want to reiterate that, and to go to your comments, Councillor Whitehead. It's unfortunate that perhaps it was not stopped when the attack started, because you, as you had informed us, had been assured that that deputation was going to be above board. So it's unfortunate that it was not stopped when a conversation occurred privately with you.
Thank you. Irene?
I have to agree with Nancy that it was not followed. The policy was not followed. Part of Mr. Dorr's presentation was a complete complaint about our chief and our service, and that should not be presented to the board at one of our meetings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Deputations should inform, educate the board in relation to various perspectives and help us perform our governance role. This is not a venue to attack our officers and civilians that perform the difficult work every day. There are venues outlined in the OIRPD available to any person who feels aggrieved, and this meeting is not that avenue. We as the board are the employer. We support our people in their work, and we do it in the manner we are authorized through the Police Service Act. The board supports our people and their great work. To have a deputation that didn't have anything but one line about a mission statement opened us up to any kind of that came out. It did not meet the policy, and if we look at the date that the deputation was received, 7 working days was not 7 working days. So, but again, getting back to the situation of its spiraling down into a vitriolic attack on our employees was insulting. In terms of all of our responsibilities, I would like to see maybe something to go to OCOPS to see maybe we were derelict in our duty. That's something maybe we should consider. I feel absolutely awful that I sat silent, shocked by that vitriolic attack. And if I look back on the timing, because it says in the policy that a 4-minute warning was to be given, I looked back on Mr. Coleman's tapes, and at 5 minutes, a warning was given. There was no warning, it railed off, and he wasn't stopped. If you look at the tape again, and maybe we should bring that up and take a look at the tape, you can see that after 5 minutes, the acting chair says, we're not planning to stop you. So again, there was issues with that, but first and foremost, our employees were attacked, and we did do nothing. I suggest we do go to OCOPS.
Thank you. And Madam, could you take the chair for a second? I'm first-time speaker, and then I'll come back to you, Terry, for second-time speaker. And I don't think Walt should be the one that takes full responsibility for this. I think that, I wasn't here, so I can't comment on what I said. I did watch the tape. But I agree with Councillor Whitehead that anybody could have dinged the glass at any time, called a point of order, and stopped it if they felt it was inappropriate. And so I think it's unfair to put the whole blame on Walt. I know you were the acting chair at the time, and I guess the primary responsibility fell to you, but a more experienced member of the board had that opportunity to stop it. I agree with Chad, we need a fix. I don't like taking responsibility in an agenda review. It makes me uncomfortable, whether it's a go, no-go. I found out from firsthand experience, you get criticized both ways on the same decision. And the one at the city does work well, where we hear about delegations, make it an assessment and make a decision as a board or as a standing committee of council, whether you want to hear that delegation at the next meeting. And I fully support going in that direction. I'm not sure I'm ready today to stand the policy on its head, but I would like to change the part that, and make the 7 days clear what it is, because I think there was some misunderstanding around that, 7 days before the board meeting. And the second part, that the board decides on the appropriateness of a delegation, not just the board chair. So I want to put those two things out there, and to the chief and to the president of the association, and back to all members of our service, as chair, I took these two letters very seriously. I met with the chief, I met with the president of the Senior Officers Association, so Jamie and Glenn, thanks for your time. I want you to know as chair that we understand the difficult job you guys have. We appreciate it, and on behalf of the community, we very much appreciate the safety that you are providing to our community, and that you're taking some 70,000 calls per year, calls for service. Now, it's our job to support you with good policy, training, and supervision. I think we do that also. But it sounds like just something that went south at one meeting. I think by changing the deputation policy would respond to your letters and hopefully make you feel more comfortable. But you have my full support out there and what you do in the field, and very much appreciate what you do every day in the job in making our community safer. So with that, Madam Deputy Chair, I'll take the chair back. And I know the chief wants to come in on this. Did you want to wait till Councillor White speaks for the second time, or do you prefer to go now?
Thank you. We are dealing with board policy, right? At this point in time.
What is your point?
We're dealing with the deputy. Well, I just want to make sure.
No, we're dealing with the letters. That's what we're dealing with right now.
Well, I thought we're
The letters from the chief.
I thought we were dealing with the delegation.
Yes, that's coming next.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I was asked when I attended here, because I couldn't get a hold of Mr. Dorr, to ensure that he understood that the mission statement that he wanted to speak to wasn't ours. And when he arrived, I did exactly what I was asked of me to do. I went up to Mr. Dorr and let him know that the mission statement that he was presenting was not ours. He said he was aware of it, but he thought that was something that should be presented in regards to consideration and adoption, and it really speaks to the issues that are really concerning to him. And my last parting comment as I left, Mr. Chair, was keep it respectful. That was my last parting comment. It's about a public record. Then I came back down. Now, in that deputation, a good chunk of it was dealing with a mission statement. He read verbatim and very transferable type issues within that mission statement that should be considered. Had no problem with that. Then when it veered off to the chief and then 5 officers, no question that was outside the realm of what was supposed to be spoken to, and certainly something that would be seen as acceptable at this table. Having said that, the reality is we also have to put in context and the circumstances and the individual that we're dealing with. We also need to understand that there's a grieving process going on. We also need to understand, Mr. Chair, that and I want to make this clear because Nancy keeps indicating that it didn't meet the policy, and if you're suggesting because it was 2 hours too late, and that was a good rationale to change the dynamics of the presentation, then I would suggest to you, again, we're being, now we're splitting hairs.
Councillor Whitehead,
The reality
please direct your comments through the chair.
The reality, I didn't point at anyone.
You just please put your comments through the chair.
The reality is that the essence of the policy, the delegation policy, and I looked at past people that come forward, past chairs, it was the exact same type of information. Where things went wrong or went astray is when it deviated from the mission statement. And the problem is, Mr. Chair, and we're going to deal with this in delegation policy and going forward, to suggest that it didn't, when I'm being told by the administrator, let's be clear, I'm being told 2 occasions by the administrator that it did meet the policy, then who am I supposed to question the administrator? I felt that was good enough for me.
Okay. Chief, response. And Jamie, I want to offer you the same opportunity to come up and respond if you'd like. So, Chief?
Thank you very much. The incidents of how this came to be and the selective recall that is presented, I find somewhat concerning. When I asked the board administrator if this deputation meets the policy and I'm told no, that means no, in my opinion. I listened to something different today. What the board needs to know is that the Hamilton Police Service is absolutely committed to our mission, to our vision, to our values, and we are not distracted in our dedication to the people of Hamilton. Our oath of office stipulates that we release information in accordance with the law. We do not, we will not, and we have not ever shied away from our legal responsibilities in applying the law in a consistent manner and being held accountable in law for our actions. And we fully support all of the multiple levels of governments and police oversight that our service is subjected to. We are held accountable through the Police Services Act, through the Office of the Independent Police Review Director, through the SIU, through the criminal, civil, and inquest courts. We do not participate in trials by the media, nor will we participate in trials that take place in the court of public opinion. And we will not comment on any evidence, and that restricts us in our ability to respond. Sir Robert Peel informs us that the police seek and preserve public favor not by pandering to public opinion, but by constantly demonstrating an absolute impartial service to the law. For us to be commenting on any facts, the forensics, the evidence, it will be interpreted as attempting to usurp any judicial process that takes place which is approved in law. Our evidence, all of it, will be presented in the upcoming inquest, where evidence will be presented under oath by our officers. It will be tested through rigorous cross-examination, and a jury will adjudicate on the facts that will be presented, not rhetoric, not unsubstantiated opinion, and not junk science. There is much evidence that is yet to be released in this case, and that will be done for the public, and it will be done, and the good citizens of Hamilton will be fully informed, and they will be absolutely aware of all of the work that our officers have done. And I and this command, along with our senior officers, along with our supervisors, we fully support our officers in the lawful performance of their duty. And this is a very tough job. This is a very dangerous job. And our members do this work. And they do it very, very well. And I, as their chief, have complete confidence in their ability to go forward and do this job. And those are my comments.
Thank you. Jamie, is there anything else you'd like to add as a second letter writer to myself as chair?
Mr. Chair, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to address the board, and I've heard all the comments that everyone has made around the table. I would just reiterate what the chief said, but go further in saying that the letter that I sent on behalf of the Senior Officers Association was a personal letter to you, Mr. Chair, and for the reflection of the board. And I appreciate the comment and conversations that have gone around the table today. And I have all the faith that this board is moving forward, and that there will be change coming through this. And that was really the intent of the letter. So I thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. So I think I'd like to do now is move forward. And what I want to do is move on to the change that will get triggered by this correspondence and that experience, and that is a change in the delegation policy. So, Councillor Collins, do you have a motion?
I do, and I also have a question after that, if you would allow it. But my motion would read that the Police Services Board deputation request policy be amended by adding the following. The delegation requests are listed on the next appropriate board agenda for consideration. It's not necessary for you to be present when your delegation request is being considered unless the item is on that day's agenda. Item 2 is that following the board meeting, you will be contacted again by the administrator to advise if your request is approved or denied. And item 3 is that if your request is approved, you will be provided with possible dates to schedule your presentation. In that first part there, Mr. Chairman, if I may, it's essentially forwarding the delegation requests to the board. They will be added as a formal part of the agenda process and will be open to debate and discussion. I am also moving another portion of the current policy, and we would, I would move that we delete, quote, provide a written version of the deputation to the administrator, sorry.
Can we split those two and two? Can you do the first one you did, which was to change that the delegation request would come to the board? We'll do that one first. There's a seconder to that one. Second by Councillor Whitehead. Discussion on it. So this would take the responsibility of accepting or rejecting the delegation away from the chair and put it in front of the whole board so we can have a good, wholesome debate on it. Discussion on that. Nancy, do you have a question on it?
No, I will support that. I will have an issue with the second part because I believe that we do have a governance meeting coming up, which is going to be dealing with changes to policy, and that's where I'm hoping the second part would be addressed.
Okay. Any other questions on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Carried.
Opposed? That carries unanimously. Your second motion, Councillor Collins?
On the deletion.
Yep.
It's moved that the board seek to delete the words, quote, provide a written version of the deputation to the administrator.
Okay. Is there a second to that? Well, I was going to recommend that we take this back to the governance committee because there's a change in process. So do you want to change your motion and read that
well, I'll put it on the
the balance
table.
of the deputation policy be referred to the governance committee?
Yeah, so I'll put it on the table, I'll move it for discussion purposes, and if you want to procedurally and refer that to governance through another mover and seconder.
Okay, somebody want to move, we table it to governance?
Well, he's very good speaker, so Chair, Councillor Collins moved it. I second it. I want to speak to it.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure,
Then I'll take a tabling motion.
Yeah, that's fine. One of the things I find in regards to our responsibility in governance is to ensure that we do not discriminate regardless of a person's abilities, capacity, etc. And when you look at the demand for a written version, I mean, you might as well just send a letter in and not have a deputation at all. Secondly, if you can't write and you're illiterate, then you're discriminating against an individual from a human rights perspective in his ability or her ability to make a presentation in front of the board. So I think for those reasons, and there's probably more, and I don't mind sending it off to the policy committee, that it should be seriously considered that we should be open and we shouldn't set the bar so high that individuals are left out of the opportunity to provide deputation.
Sounds like a great argument to make at the policy committee. So is there a mover to table it to the governance committee? Moved by Walt, seconded by Hanlon. All in favor of the referral? Carried. Now, I don't want to go back to the two letters. I've heard it be tabled and I've heard it been received. Does somebody want to make a motion? Question first? Go ahead, Councillor, with your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of governance, in terms of the policies that have been adopted by the board, certainly not those that would fall within the Act, the Police Services Act, and those are clearly stated, but for board-related policies that have been adopted, and let's use the deputation policy as the example, who is the arbiter in terms of whether or not the policy has been followed or not? Is that something for?
I suspect that would be now the responsibility of the board. It was the responsibility of the chair. They get advice from the administrator, they get advice from legal, they get advice from the chief and the deputies. They are all in attendance, but it's ultimately the decision of the chair before, now the board.
No, in terms of whether or not, if someone disputes, in fact, that the policy has been followed or not, who's the arbiter in that process? Traditionally at the city, I'm wearing my other hat. Traditionally,
it's the clerk.
We go to the clerk.
Yeah.
And we ask the clerk whether or not that policy has been followed or not.
I don't know if that's laid out here. I know as chair, I took advice from everyone. And
so I mean that this, we've argued a lot about something obviously there's no policy on, and I would refer the issue of that particular issue, and it's a big one. It's a big governance issue. That needs to be referred to the governance committee to be clearly resolved. It can't be gray. It needs to be black and white. And I would refer that issue. I don't know how you want to label that. But in terms of the following of board policies, we need a clear understanding of who the arbiter is as it relates to whether or not, if there's any dispute in the future about deputation or any other policy that we have, we certainly need a clear understanding as to who's going to make the ruling. I'm accustomed to the clerk making a ruling at the city. We have a procedural issue. We turn to the clerk renders their decision. We certainly don't turn to Mr. Murray or our finance staff or anyone else to try to give us that guidance. There are clear roles and responsibilities that have been established. We follow those, but at some point in time, at times, there needs to be a referee, if you want to call it that, and we seek their guidance. That, just following on this discussion, doesn't seem to exist right now in this forum, and that is very problematic.
Well,
So
I would expect.
I would put that on the table, Mr. Chairman, if you want to refer that issue as well.
I'll just respond to that and look for referral. I would suspect that decision will be the board's now, where it used to be the chair's. I'm not sure we asked the clerk to rule on whether a deputation is appropriate or not. We certainly asked her about rules of order. But whether a deputation is appropriate or not would be the decision of the standing committee or council. It would now come to this through a democratic process, a vote of the board, decide whether it does or doesn't meet. But I think it's a good idea just to refer it to the governance committee, get it away today, and any issue can be brought up at the governance committee on any policy, and that's another one. Yes, Mr.
Just on that, let's be clear that it is our policy, the board's policy. It's not the service policy. And I believe Mark was a member of the seniors organization, and they sent a letter, so clearly he would be in a conflict in regards to being advising on the policy. So let's just be clear, there's a clear delineation on board policy and the service. And the only one that could arbitrate or make a decision on board policy is whoever we designate amongst ourselves as a board.
Okay, I think you can all bring this up then at the governance committee, unless you want to do a specific motion, but I think any of these issues can be brought up at governance committee and tackle them. So I want to go back now to the two letters. Is a motion to receive them or to defer them? I look for guidance from the moved received by Collins, second by Whitehead. Discussion on that. Seeing none, all in favor? There, thank you.
I'm against it.
Okay, can Walt have his negative vote recorded then in the minutes? Okay, let's move on to 5.2, which is a year-end report budget variance. What's your wish? Did you approve it? I'm sorry? This, item 5.2, year-end report budget variance. The recommendation of the Hamilton Board approve the allocation plan for the 2013 operating favorable variance of $640,000. And it's laid out in the reports where we get transferred to. Mover on that, Nancy. Second, Madeline. Discussion on it? Chad.
Mr. Chairman, as I understand it, traditionally the year-end variances are deposited into a reserve account and are used for future capital requirements. Had past discussions at the board in terms of the how healthy that reserve is, and as I understand it, when you start looking at some of the projects that are on the horizon, especially the forensic center, there's certainly no ability for that reserve to pay even over a period of time for a project that's that large, and there are others that are on the list. I would ask, sorry again, to wearing my other hat, as I understand it, last year was the first year that the city entertained Police Service Board capital budget items as part of its own capital budget process. Can I get an understanding in terms of how we recommend capital budget items through the reserve that does not have enough funds in it to support those capital items? How has the board dealt with that, or staff, how has HBS staff dealt with that in the past?
John?
Through you, Chair. The service will come forward to the board with a project for approval. Funding and initiatives or funding options will be available to the board. Yes, there are times where we have gone to the city to fund from their own reserves specific projects relating to it. So between the two, how those capital projects will be funded.
So when the reserve cannot support, then the capital ask, if you want to call it that, that's when the request then is bumped through you, Mr. Chairman, to the city's budget process?
Well, through the development charges as well is another process that
If it's eligible.
That's right.
Right.
That we'll go through. Again, with any recommendation put forward, there will be some sort of funding option given to the board for a decision to be made.
In terms of then, are there policies around that, written policies that the board has established as it relates to its capital process, and does it have a reserve policy in place?
The reserve policy is consistent with the City of Hamilton's reserve policies, so they'll have the option to fund from the various specific reserves available to the service. As you see in one of the reports there, I identified the reserves that relate specifically to the Hamilton Police Service, and then any additional capital projects that are transferred over to the City of Hamilton. It is City Council's decision whether they want to approve that capital project and where the funding will come from. Sometimes it does revert back to the reserves for the capital reserves that the Hamilton Police Service is accounted for.
Okay. I asked the question in the context of when I look at the bomb truck request, I think that one was a relatively small amount compared to the other capital budget items that we have, the Forensic Center, the Marine Unit upgrade, and others. It could have been accommodated within, I think, within the reserve amount. I don't know what the existing balance is. I don't know if it was referenced in the report. But that request went on to the city for, as a funding request. So when does the board make the decision to fund it out of their own reserves, and when does the trigger get pulled to then push it onto or forward it onto the city's budget process, in that instance where the board could have decided to pull it from its capital reserve?
Your Chair, I'm not aware of any specific policy that would specifically mention we go forward to the board or to the City of Hamilton. There are priorities that the service feels capital projects need to be addressed from year to year, so we will come forward to the board for those. And the other requests that go through the city through the city requests for those particular capital projects through the City Finance Department, we will provide with projects that we feel deemed necessary and require assistance from the City of Hamilton.
And I think we're without, city is without a policy that says that any year-end variances are then belong to the Police Services Board. How does the legislation work in that regard? Have we forwarded anything to the city in the past that says the board, a budget is passed for the board? If there's a positive variance, who does that positive variance belong to?
The city has its option to not approve those variances. Traditionally, history has shown that along with any other city department, any budget surpluses are reflective in the reserves for that particular department, and in this case for the police service.
So these recommendations propose then to reinvest them back into reserves. But I think what I heard is that the variance actually, from a legal technical perspective, belongs to the city. Is there a motion that flows from today's decision first to ask the city for the Police Services Board to retain that variance and reinvest it in the reserve, or are we working from the assumption that raise their hand and ask for the money back?
Past, it's never gone back to the city. However, the normal reserve policies and the type of reserves that the Hamilton Police Service does have, the city has every right to address those reserves in any way, fashion they feel is appropriate.
So to be clear, if the city said, we gave you X, you only needed Y, there's a positive variance, we'd like it back, they have the legal ability to retain those funds?
I'm not so sure on the legality of those funds. I know traditionally it stays with the department where those, for future capital needs. It's like any other city department from my understanding.
I think that's, if I may, Chair.
Yes, certainly.
I think that's something that would need to be looked at in terms of the fact that this is a board that operates under its own act. And I don't know the answer to the question, but I would make the assumption, since the law requires the service to prepare the estimates of the board, and it is the board's budget, then the board would have some say in that matter. And conversely, as we were last year, because of the number of retirements in a deficit position, would it then be appropriate for the board to send the city an invoice for that deficit? I don't know the answer to the question, but I muse both of the contrarian opinions.
Very both legitimate scenarios, and both have now played out. So I would ask that if we could maybe give direction for
Ask John to get back to us with an information report for the next meeting on it.
in terms of how that legally works out, and if there are some legal discrepancies there, then we should be looking at establishing a policy that seeks to clearly spell out in black and white how the nature of that relationship then would work in future years. Understanding it's worked well, it sounds like in the absence of a policy, but the fact that we don't know what it is, I think highlights the fact we need more information. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Councilor Whitehead.
Yeah, I think I had the same questions when we started getting reimbursed on an annualized basis of, I think, around $700,000 a year for our court services. So the budget, I think, is $4 million or just above $4 million. Phased in over the, I guess, 4 years or 5 years. That is going to be offset by the province of Ontario. Yet I was a bit surprised that that was money that we budget for in regards to the court services. We're getting reimbursed for those court services, and yet that money never ever got transferred back to the city. And my understanding, there's no policy. The police services just sort of basically assumed that $4 million for their own purposes. Help me understand, in the lack of policy, how the police services become in possession of dollars paying for to offset a budgeted item that we no longer have to levy for because it's being paid for.
The assumption in the question is that the overall global budget was increased by the additional $704,000. And the overall global budget, I could say, would have been an additional $704,000 if we had done it in the manner that you're asking for it to be done. Keeping in mind that's a $4.5 million expenditure at $700,000 coming from the province in each of year to take over that. If you're just going to do a straight analysis of budget line item for grant line item, I accept what you're saying. If you're looking at the totality of the budget, our budgets were not, in addition, $704,000 extra last year or the year before when we received that grant.
Yeah, I think what I'm looking at is the board passes a budget, it goes to council, they approve it. In that approval, whatever it might be, it contains the cost of managing the courts. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair, yes, it is correct. However, monies that we received are applied directly against the cost of the court security.
Okay, so we're going to get this report back,
Okay,
Councilor Whitehead, at Councilor Collins' request.
So I just looking for clarification, Mr. Chair. So we get $700,000 from the province of Ontario. We're already budgeted $700,000 for the police services that we're levying the taxpayers of this community. So now you have $1.4 million in one given year for the court services when the cost is actually $700,000 less. So help me understand how you reconcile that.
Allow me to help, if you don't mind. If the bill is $4 million and we get $700,000, the next year we only bill the city $3.3 million, and the $700,000 is included as additional income so that we can continue to pay the bill of $4 million. So the city is actually getting the credit of $700,000 every time it comes in. So we aren't billing $4 million every year. We keep reducing what we're billing the city by the $700,000 that we're receiving from the province. So we're taking in consideration. So it's not a double bill. It's actually a deal for the city.
So it's my understanding that $700,000 last year was used to offset the hiring of the new police officers. Is that not correct?
You're now talking about the totality of the budget. If you look at the revenue on our budget line, how much our revenue is, and you look at the expenditures, the $700,000 comes in as revenue, but it goes against the bill of what the court cost is. The $700,000 for the additional officers is another.
We'll take it offline, but again, like I said, it's just, you're spending $4 million for court cost. You're getting $4 million back from the province of Ontario, and I'm hearing that that cost is being reduced accordingly on an annualized basis in regards to the ask of the City of Hamilton. So I just need to follow that up because that's not my understanding.
I think Councillor softened the tax increase to 2.9% this year as part of that $700,000 uplift to the province in court costs. Okay, they have a recommendation before you. There's a $604,000 surplus. They're suggesting 4 locations where it gets transferred to. Moved by Councillor Collins, second by Nancy. Discussion on it? Well, the direction you've already provided to come back to us with operating surpluses and what's the legal requirements of that. All in favor of the motion? Carried. Thank you. Let's move on to 5.3, the new false alarm proposal. They want to develop a new policy on false alarm reports. If you could take the chair for a second, Madeline, I just want to say, first of all, that this has been long overdue. The bulk of the people, I was telling the chief at agenda review, the bulk of the people who get tagged with this money are people who are paying a lot of taxes, subsequently paying a lot of police costs, never use the police, except when they get a bill because their alarm system fails them and results in a false alarm charge being sent to them, an invoice, and that'll stop that by turning this back to the alarm companies and being their responsibility. So with that, I'll take the chair back, and Ken, you have a comment on that?
Just an explanation of the whole board report, just so the members are well aware of it. All this is asking for us is allow us to go forward and develop a new bylaw, and the bylaw actually will come back to the board. What we did is the original concept of the bylaw was to reduce the number of false alarms we have in our community. We have plateaued and we're not reducing them. We still have 7,600 false alarms where officers are going to. 95% of them are false. And the reason they're false is because of improper maintenance or how the alarms are put in. And so what we want to do is we went out and looked at best practices across the province, and we looked at 14 different police services, and we found that Durham had the best program, and we want to adopt the Durham program. And what it does, it will actually put the responsibility back on the alarm companies. And so if in fact we have a false alarm, we will charge a fee for service for us responding to that alarm. We will no longer bill our citizens, and we will no longer not go to an alarm. And so we're giving better customer service. We're putting the responsibility back to where it belongs. And the ultimate goal, when Durham did this, they had a reduction of alarms by 40%. And that's our ultimate goal. But if we can reduce by 40%, get our alarms down to about 4,000 at a time, you're saving dollars and cents for officers responding. We're making the community safer, and it's just a win-win for all of us. So all we're asking for in this proposal is that the board allow us to move forward in developing a new false alarm bylaw, and we will actually bring the bylaw back to the board for final approval.
Thanks for that explanation. Moving that, Madeline? I saw you nodding through the whole response. Seconder to that? Irene, discussion on it? Seeing none, all in favor? Carried. The last item is 5.4, request from the President of the Ontario Association of Police Service Boards for $1,500. Moved by Nancy, seconded by Madeline. Paul, yes. Wait, I had a seconder. All in favor? Carried. And we're on to new business. I want to do the first new business. This is Deputy Chief Ken Leaner's last meeting, and I want to, on behalf of the board, thank you for your outstanding service, right from a cadet, right through to Deputy Chief. We're going to miss you around here. I think that you got a wonderful style that we'd love to hang on to if you want to stick around, but I understand that you want to go on to another phase of your life, and I think we all respect that. But And of course, I'm sure you'll miss us too, but we're all going No, that's okay, but we're all going to have the opportunity, I may not be as nice to you on April 30th, but we're all going to have the opportunity to wish Ken well at a retirement party on April 30th, and I hope all of you can attend that because, as I say, Ken has provided outstanding service to this police service. Anybody else on that?
Well, yeah, I believe I'm the senior member on the board now. You senior?
Yes.
Okay, Nancy.
Next.
So I'm going to pass on to Nancy then.
Thank you. Well, on behalf of the board, Deputy Linders, our heartfelt congratulations. You have served the service, this community, in a way that just cannot be described. So all the very best to you. I know what retirement is, and I can tell you, you're going to love this club. So congratulations.
That's Whitehead.
Well, I just want to echo this, certainly the length of time I've been here, Ken has always answered the phone, always provided straight up answers, always with integrity and professionalism. Certainly the sense I have in regards to anyone that fell and worked under Ken, there's a lot of deep felt respect for the years of service he's provided this community, and my hat's off and thank you very much.
Chief De Caire.
Thank you very much. They took all the good material I had. Ken began his career as a police cadet, and as you can see, he's one of the few that has retained that boyish good looks through 35 years. He has worked in training, foot patrol, mobile patrol, Old Clothes Detective Office, Crime Stoppers, media relations, to name but a few, before moving into the senior ranks of the service and being more responsible for the day-to-day operations as a divisional commander, and then for many years as the deputy chief. Ken was responsible for, at the time, one of the most successful firearms amnesty programs in 2006 that took place here in Hamilton. Managed and led a component of the 2003 Ontario-wide blackout. He was instrumental, and I know that personally this is one of the things that he is most proud of. He was instrumental in managing and working through the conflict around the Red Hill Creek Expressway and dealing particularly with the Aboriginal community, and he has retained that connection to the Aboriginal community, particularly in building the policies of the service to include Aboriginal treaty rights, which I think, well, certainly when I came here, one of the first that I heard of in Ontario. Developed a graffiti prevention strategy, worked with the Fugitive Apprehension Unit, and every time the horses walk down the street, I see that first I check to make sure he's not on the back of one, but then second, the smile on his face because he was one of the people responsible for that. He has shared his expertise with local organizations as well as the province in sitting on provincial and national committees, so his fingerprints are all over policing for many years to come. He has received provincial awards for the strategic and unique ways of dealing with the community and implementing community-based policing, dealing with victims of services and traffic safety. But what I also note over my many years of dealing with young people is that Ken is one of the instrumental people in advancing here in Hamilton the pro-action strategy dealing with cops and kids and giving young people an opportunity to see police officers in a different light than our normal duties. He is the recipient of the Medal of Merit of the Police Services, and he's also the recipient of the Queen's Diamond Jubilee and has completed 35 years of service here in Hamilton. And we should have great confidence moving forward and have our full knowledge that he has committed himself professionally. He started as a cadet, and one of the last programs that he brought into the service, or at least reintroduced to the service, was the cadet program, and one that is much aimed on diversity and cultural competence and expanding our organization. So, on behalf of the 1,200 men and women, 400 volunteers in the service, thank you very much for the years of service to the people of Hamilton. But on a personal level, thank you very much for the last 5 years that we have had an opportunity to work very, very closely together. And I think has been an excellent command team.
I could go on forever. No, I've got to admit, first of all, I'm absolutely thrilled that the board had the confidence in me to, 11 years ago to say, we want you to lead this with the command team. I've learned a lot. Part of my being has always been to problem solve and to bring innovation to the organization. And so at the end of 35 years, you look around and you say, well, I did that, and I was involved with that, and you see how the organization's grown. Hamilton, as our chief knows, is a different animal. And it's a different animal because we have a reputation across the province of being able to catch bad guys and to do it very, very effectively and efficiently. And I'm very proud of our reputation amongst the province. I've traveled through my contacts through the FBI and right nationally. And when you say you're from Hamilton, the people just smile and say, you guys are cops. And I think that makes us proud because that's what we started off to do. But we also have this phenomenal reputation across the country as being innovative and creative and can do anything for very little money. And I think that has made us a better service and a stronger service. So as I leave, it's a little sad to leave, but I'm thrilled with the command team we have, the senior officers we have, the men and women that do their job every day. It makes me very, very proud and makes me feel very safe in the community I live in too.
Thank you. And I'm going to tell a good story about the Red Hill at Ken's retirement. I was the CEO of the contractor that built it and had to walk behind Ken one day, and along with Chris Murray. But just a personal question, though, Ken. Nancy says that retirement's a wonderful thing, and I mentioned this at council when Tim was retiring for planning and economic development. And I found out 2.5 weeks after I retired, I didn't have a clue how to send a fax. Do you know how to do that?
I'm very technical. I can get it all done. It's just
Perfect.
if I'm allowed to.
Get used to doing all that yourself. Okay, is there any other business we need to talk about? Any other new business? Councillor Whitehead.
Business. It's a really interesting article that was, I don't know if it was the Spectator that had it. It was the chief of police from, I believe it was Vancouver, who talked about their approaches, and in fact their statistics were very favorable dealing with situations with mental health individuals. And so I'm wondering, I believe he also spoke at a conference. I'm not sure if we had service members at the conference. And was there anything learned from that presentation that we haven't already implemented that we might consider implementing?
An important question. We had people in attendance at the conference, and we have spent an awful lot of time looking at these issues that are unfolding right across the entire country. But we're looking at them from the CACP, from the OACP perspective. Our service has participated in working with our ministry in looking at issues in dealing with mental health and those that face those vulnerabilities in their lives. What I can tell you is that the Hamilton Police Service has spent a lot of time in making sure that our systems are innovators in the area. And one of the things that is very important is we actually presented at that conference. And what we presented was the COAST model. And more particularly, people were very interested in what we have done in adapting the COAST model to include now the Rapid Response Team. Rapid Response Team project has been in place for about 3 months, 4 months now. And Inspector Graham was leading that. What we have seen in the early results there is that we have changed our apprehension rate from about 75% of those that we deal with being apprehended. We have reduced that to about 20, 22, 25%. Please don't quote me on the numbers. I'm just going from the top of my head from the reports that I looked at. So we are looking at all of those issues. There's about to be a report that will be released by the Ombudsman dealing with this issue provincially. We will review the report in the context of Hamilton to see what is appropriate. We have been teaching in use of force, and you heard from John Alsbergas, and you've seen the numbers tonight. We have been teaching right through all of our courses, right through use of force, the issue of containment, the issue of utilizing proper resources, the issue of tactical communication, This past weekend, we disarmed an individual through tactical communication and then the eventual use of force that led to no injuries, that was armed and confronting our people with a knife. This happens on our streets, I won't say every day, but almost every day. And I draw your attention back to the correspondence that I issued to the citizens of Hamilton on October the 4th, identifying that our officers dealt with in less than 90 days 1,040 incidents of dealing with those suffering emotional crisis or mental illness, made 706, dealt with 760 people, 168 apprehensions, 61 people to hospital, and we used force 4 times. Again, piggybacking on the deputy's comments, I think that we are leaders in our response to mental health. We can always learn. We will always learn. We'll always look at programs. We'll always keep an open mind. But I can tell you that I have great confidence in our people's ability to intervene in these circumstances, great confidence in our training, great confidence in our supervisors, and great confidence in the policies of this service. So we will assess what comes forward. But right now, I can tell the citizens of this community that the Hamilton Police are responding in a very professional manner.
Anybody else got items of new business? If not, we'll adjourn for 15 minutes or take a 15-minute recess while we set up to go in camera.